Welcome back to the fireside. Today, I shall read a tale, penned by Stephen R. Lawhead, by the name of In the Hall of the Dragon King, as shown here. This book is a fantasy. Please, find a seat, get a drink, perhaps a snack if you are hungry. This book leans to the longer side, so make sure you are comfortable and ready to listen. Are you ready? Good. Then let us begin. The snow lay deep and undisturbed beneath the silver light of the dawning sky. Overhead, a raven surveyed a silent landscape as its black wings feathered the cold, thin air. The bird's rasping call was the only sound to be heard for miles, breaking the frozen solitude in irregular staccato. All around, the land lay asleep in the depths of winter. Every bear, every fox, hare, and squirrel was warm in its rustic nest. Cattle and horses stood contented in their stalls, heads drooping in slumber and quietly munching the first of the day's provender. In the country, smoke drifted from peasant huts into the windless sky from rough-hewn chimneys, sent aloft from hearth fires tended through the night. The village, clustered close around the mighty walls of Ascalon Castle, slept in pristine splendor, a princess safe in the arms of her protector. All through the land, nothing moved, nothing stirred, save the raven wheeling slowly overhead. Quentin lay shivering in his cell, a huddled ball topped by a thin woolen blanket that he clasped tightly around his ears in a resolute effort to keep out the night chill. He had been awake and cold long before the sullen sky showed its drab gray through the lone slit of a window high up in his cell. Now, the gloom had receded sufficiently to make out the dim outlines of the simple objects that furnished his bare apartment. Next to the straw pallet where he slept stood a sturdy oaken stool, made by the hand of a local peasant. A table of the same craft stood against the wall opposite his bed, containing his few personal articles: a clay bowl for his supper, a candle in a wooden holder, a small bell for his prayers, and a parchment scroll on which were written all the rules and observances of his acolyte's office, which, after almost 3 years, Quentin was still struggling to memorize. From somewhere in the inner recesses of the temple, the chime of a bell sounded. Quentin groaned, then jumped up in bed, pulling the blanket around his shoulders. Today was the day he remembered, the day of great change. He wondered what it could be, for as closely as he had followed the portents, he could not guess it. All the omens had pointed to a change. The ring around the moon for 3 nights before the snow, the storm itself coming on his name day, a spider he'd seen busily constructing a web across his door, although that had been some time ago, he had not forgotten. There's no doubt, change was forecast. Its exact nature remained a mystery, but such was often the pleasure of the gods to leave part of the prophecy hidden. He had at last deduced the date of the change by a dream in which he had climbed a high mountain, and then had leaped from its very pinnacle and sailed out to space, not falling, but flying. Flying dreams were always lucky. His lucky day was always a holy day, and this day, the Feast of Kamali, admittedly a minor holy day, was the first holy day to have fallen since this dream. Today, without question, was the eventful day. The tokens were indisputable. Quentin reviewed them in his mind as he hurriedly threw his coarse, heavy acolyte's robe over his head of close-cropped brown hair. He stuffed his feet into baggy stockings and laced the thongs of his sandals around them tightly. Then, grabbing his prayer bell, he dashed out of the cubicle and into the dark, chilly corridor beyond. Quentin was halfway down the high-arched passageway when another bell sounded. A deep, resonant peal rang out in 3 short intervals. A brief pause, and 3 again. Quentin puzzled over the meaning of this bell. He had not heard it before that he could remember. Suddenly it came to him. Alarm. He stopped confused. As he turned to run towards the sound of the bell, he collided blindly with the round, fully padded form of Bjorkus, one of the elder priests.
"Oof, lad!"
cried the priest good-naturedly.
"No need for panic."
"That was the alarm bell just now," cried Quentin, inching around the puffing priest. "We must hurry."
"No need. The servants of Ariel do not run. Besides," he added with a wink, "that was a summons bell, not the alarm."
Quentin suddenly felt very foolish. He felt his face coloring. His eyes sought the stone flagging at his feet. The jovial priest placed a heavy arm on Quentin's young shoulders.
"Come, we will see what drags us from our warm slumber so early on this chilly morning."
The two moved off down the corridor together, and shortly came to the vast entrance hall of the temple. A cold, stinging wind was rushing through the open doors at the entrance. A priest in a scarlet cassock, one of the order of the temple guards, was already pulling the giant wooden doors closed. 3 other priests stood round a large, shapeless bundle lying at their feet on the floor. Whatever it was, the dark bundle, uncertain in a dim morning light, had been recently dragged in from the outdoors. A trail of snow attested to the fact, as did the snow-encrusted bundle itself. Closer, Quentin saw that the bundle was that of a human form, wrapped heavily against the cold. The priests were now bending over the inert shape, to which all appearances seemed dead. Bjorkus placed a warning hand on Quentin's arm and stepped slowly forward.
"What is this, good brothers? A wayward pilgrim early to the shrine?"
"This is no pilgrim by the looks of him," said the guard, rubbing his hands to restore the warmth. "More likely a beggar for our feast day torts." "Then he shall have them," replied Bjorkus. "He's past nourishment," observed Izaj, the eldest priest of the temple, whose symbol of office was a long braided beard. "Or he very soon will be, I fear." He tapped his sacred white rod and stirred the air in front of him, indicating that the man should be turned over, the better to see his face. 2 junior priests knelt over the lifeless form and gingerly tugged at the wider part of the bundle, which formed the man's shoulders. The priests, overly careful not to defile themselves lest they should find themselves touching a dead body, ineffectually jerked at the corners of the rough fur skins the man wore for warmth. Bjorkus watched the timid struggle and with impatience, finally exploding.
"Get out of the way! I'm not afraid of Azrael. My hands have touched worse."
He stooped over the body and rolled it into his arms. Quentin, moving around the perimeter for a better look, gasped at the sight. The man's face was ashen white, and his lips, pressed together in a thin line, were blue. He appeared completely frozen, but even as Quentin looked on fearfully, the man's eyes flickered. Bjorkus, noticing the remnant of life, ordered one of the junior priests away.
"Bring wine, brother. Hurry!"
"And a vial of unction." To the rest he directed.
"Here now, help me loosen his wraps. We may pull him back from Hayoth yet."
The priests fell upon the motionless figure, carefully unwrapping the layers of clothing. Their astonishment showed visibly in their faces when they had finished, and in the face of the priest, who had just then returned with the wine and unguent. There on the floor before them lay a knight in rude battle dress. His head was encased in a leather helm with crisscross bands of iron. His torso carried a breastplate of the same make and material, but studded with short spikes, and his forearms and shins were sheathed in studded guards. Bjorkus, still holding the man's head, tugged at the strap fastening the helmet, and rolled free, clanking upon the stone floor, and a murmur went up from those surrounding. Quentin looked away. The knight's head was a mass of blood. An open wound gaped just over his temple, where skin and bone had been crushed by a sharp blow. The kind priest knelt with the knight's head on his knees and pushed the man's matted hair from his forehead. He gently loosed the bindings of the breastplate, and 2 priests set aside. A groan emerged from the man's throat, shallow at first, then gaining in strength. "The vial," Bjorkus ordered. Snatching it up and dipping 2 fingers into the salve, the priest smoothed the healing ointment onto the man's face. Its aromatic vapors produced an immediate result, for the soldier's eyes flickered again and then snapped open as those of a man struggling out of a dream. "So he is to be with us a little longer," said Isash. "Give him some wine. He may tell us of his errand." the old priest stepped closer and leaned low on his staff to hear better what might transpire. Bjorkus administered the wine, and as the knight, without strength enough to lift his head, allowed the liquor to be poured down his throat. In Bjorkus's hands, the wine seemed to have a magical effect. Color seeped slowly back into the man's face, and his breathing now deepened, where before there had been no discernible breath at all. "Welcome, good soldier," Izash addressed the knight respectfully. "If you feel like talking, perhaps you could tell us how you have come here, and why." The fair-headed knight rolled his eyes and attempted to twist his head in the direction of the speaker. The effort brought up a wave of pain that washed full across his features. He sank back into Bjorkus's lap. By now the other priests had gathered close about, drawn by the summons. They spoke in low voices with one another, speculating upon the strange visitor who lay before them. The knight opened his eyes again, and they shone bright and hard, as if strength or will was returning. He opened his mouth to speak. His jaw worked the air, but no sound came forth. "More wine," Bjorkus called. As the cup was handed to him, the plump priest tugged out a pouch from the folds of his robes. He dipped into the small leather bag and sprinkled a pinch of the contents into the drink. He then lowered the cup to the knight's lips once again. The prostrate man drank more readily, and, finishing, paused before attempting to speak again. "Now, sir, enlighten an old busybody, if you will. That is, if you have no reason to conceal your errand." Izash inclined his old head. His white beard fell almost to the floor. A slight smile creased his face, as if to coax the words forth with kindness. "I am Ronsard," the knight said, his voice cracking. Another sip of wine followed that exertion. His eyes, steel gray in the silver light, looked around at the tight circle of faces bent over him. "Where am I?" he asked quietly. "You are among friends," Bjorkus told him. "This is the holy temple of Ariel, and we are his priests. You may speak freely. No harm can reach you here." As if reassured by the soothing words, the knight licked his lips, said, with as much strength as he could muster, "I am come from the king." The words were simple, but they struck the ears of the listeners like thunder. "The king! He comes from the king!" The murmur rose to echo from the high vaulted arches of the temple. Only Izash, still leaning on his rod, seemed unimpressed. "Our king? Or someone else's?" the elder priest asked. "King Escavar," the fallen knight answered with spirit. The name sent another ripple through the gathered priests. The king had been absent so long, his name unheard among his own countrymen, that hearing it now brought hope to all gathered there. "And what of the king?" the old priest continued. His probing had a method to it. He was occupying the knight, making him forget his wounds and the pain that twisted his rugged features. "I cannot say more. The rest is for the queen alone." The fighting man gulped air and licked his lips again. "I was waylaid last night, abandoned, ambushed by outlaws who now sleep with the snow." The knight looked up at the faces of the priests bending over him. Fresh blood oozed from his wound, and again by his exercise. "Worry not," said Bjorkus soothingly. "You will remain with us until you are able to resume your errand." He motioned to several of the younger priests to help him lift the soldier onto a pallet that he had brought. "No one will bother you for the details of your mission. The secret is safe within these walls. Rest now. I do not like the look of that wound." "No!" the knight shouted hoarsely, his face contorted in agony. Then in a strange, rasping whisper, "Untie. You must deliver the message to the queen. It must not wait." Bjorkus stooped with the knight's head gently in his hands, as the man was carefully transferred to the pallet. The knight clutched the wooden sides of the bed and raised himself up on his elbows. Blood ran freely down the side of his head and neck, staining his green tunic a dull, rusty gray. "You must help me," he demanded. "One of you must go in my stead to the queen." With that, he fell back in a swoon upon his bed. color had run from his face. He appeared dead to those looking on in fear and wonder. The knight glanced from one to another helplessly. Bjorkus stood, his hands dripping with the knight's fresh blood. He searched the faces of his brothers and gauged the worry there. Then he stepped close to Isash and motioned him aside. "Here is an unwanted problem," the old priest observed. "I see no help we can offer, save all that is in our power to heal his wounds and send him speedily on his way." "The delay, what of that?" "Cannot be helped, I'm afraid. Though we do all in our power to heal him, still he may die," Bjorkus objected. "He's as good as dead already." Something in the knight's voice, his look, spoke to Bjorkus. The man had certainly overcome some crushing odds, and even now he refused his deathbed on the strength of the message alone. Whatever the tidings, this news of the king's was of the highest importance, more important than life itself. At that moment, the knight regained consciousness. He was now too weakened to raise himself up, however. A low moan escaped his clenched teeth. "He is with us still," said Isash. "How persistent the courier is." Bjorkus and the old priest placed their head close to the knight's. "Good Ronsard," Bjorkus whispered. "Do not tax yourself further for your life's sake. You possess some skill in healing, and have often delivered a soul from Main's hands. Rest now. Let us tend your wound and strengthen you to your purpose." "No!" the knight objected with surprising force. "There's no time. One of you must ride to the queen." His eyes implored the priest. "Sir, you do not know what you ask," Isash answered. He waved an arm to include the whole of the assembled priests. "We are under sacred vows and cannot leave the temple, except on pilgrimage or matters of the highest sacred import. The fate of nations, kings, and powers concerns us not at all. We serve only the god Ariel. We are his subjects alone." Bjorkus looked sadly upon the dying man. "He speaks the cold heart of the oath we have taken. My own heart says go, but I cannot. For to leave the temple on this errand would mean breaking our sacred vows. Any priest who did that would forfeit his whole life's work and his soul's eternal happiness. There are none here who would risk that, nor would I ask it of them." The priest nodded solemnly in agreement. Some shrugged and turned away lest they be drafted to the task. Others held their hands out in helpless supplication. "Will not one of you match your life with mine? Will no one risk the displeasure of the god to save the king?" The knight's challenge sounded loud in the ears of those around him, although he had spoken in barely a whisper. "I will go," said a small, uncertain voice. Bjorkus, Isash, and the other priests turned to the voice. There in the shadow of the arch stood the slight figure belonging to the voice. The figure stepped slowly forward to stand by the side of the dying knight. "You, Quentin?" Bjorkus asked in amazement. The others whispered behind their hands. "You would go?" Chapter 2. The mighty horse carried his insignificant rider with tireless ease. Trained in the hard school of combat, Baldur was used to bearing the weight of grown men in full armor upon his broad back. Quentin, clinging like a cold leaf to the magnificent animal's neck, was scarcely a burden at all. The day was young and still overcast as on the day previous. The low cloud covering showed signs of breaking up before long. The wind had freshened, sending swirling white clouds across the top of the drifts with every fitful gust. Each blast sent a shiver along Quentin's ribs. He wondered whether he would ever be warm again, but he did not greatly mind the discomfort, for at last the change long foretold was in motion. Where it would lead, what it would mean, he did not know. For the present, he was caught up in the adventure of it. Yet he kept his eyes sharp to any omen that might present itself. Nothing presented itself to his gaze except a vast expanse of white, unbroken except by irregular dark lumps mushrooming out of the snow. These were the peasant huts, and sometimes he saw a face peer at him from around the corner of a doorpost, or a timid wave acknowledge his presence as a bent form hobbled through the snow under a burden of firewood. In his 7 years cloister within the temple, the land, it seemed to Quentin, had changed little. Yet it had changed. There was something unmistakable in the eyes of the peasants he met, something that struck him fresh every time he saw it. Was it fear? The thought gave him an uneasy feeling. Something loose in the land that caused these simple people to be afraid. The great chestnut warhorse plodded steadily on, his hooves silenced by the cushion of snow. Billows of steam sprouted from the animal's nostrils as his hot breath touched the icy air. Quentin turned his thoughts back on the brief procession of events that placed him on Ronsard's saddle, on Ronsard's horse. There had been long and temperate discussion following a spontaneous offer to assist the knight in accomplishing his mission. Everyone concerned, Bjorkus, his Ash, the other priests, and even the knight himself, had been against it. And still, when all the facts were laid end to end, there was no better plan. Quentin would go at once, allowing only a day's rest and feeding for the horse. The animal had been found patiently standing in the out-of-courtyard of the temple, where his master had left him before climbing and then collapsing upon the outer steps. It was the horse's whinny to his fallen rider that had alerted the temple guards, who then discovered the wounded, half-frozen knight. Reluctantly, Bjorkus had given his approval to the enterprise, for although his young age was against him, Quentin was the only logical choice. He was merely an acolyte, not a priest, as yet not having taken his vows or completed his initiation, a process that normally encompassed 20 years or more. Quentin had really only begun his instruction. At 15, he still had years of study ahead of him. Others his own age were already novitiates. The road to becoming a priest was a long one. Most began it while still small children. Quentin, although dedicated to his calling at age 8, had come to it late. Now that career was behind him. Never again would be allowed to return to the temple, except as a dutiful worshipper, begging some boon from the god. Ariel was a jealous god. Once you had turned away, he knew you no more. Only by distinguishing himself in some act of great heroism could Quentin hope to regain the god's favor. That he vowed he would do, just as soon as he could. The journey from Narmur, the holy city, to Ascalon, the king's stronghold, was a matter of 2 days by horse. The temple, according to the most ancient customs of the realm of Mensendor, was built in the high foothills overlooking the land it sheltered with its prayers. In the spring and early summer, pilgrims came from all over the country to ask for prayers for good crops and healthy livestock. Each town and priest also had a small temple or prayer house that was resided over by one or more priests, depending on need, but most worshippers preferred to make the pilgrimage to the high temple at least once a year. More often, if it could be arranged. The road, winding down from the steep hills beneath the jagged old mountains of the Fisco, was not over wide, but it was well maintained. At least it had been up to the time of the king's departure. Quentin remembered nothing of the king's leave-taking, being but a babe in arms at the time. But in the years since, he had heard retold the vivid accounts of the splendor of that parting. The king, dressed in full battle regalia, emblazoned with the royal insignia, a terrible, twisting red dragon, had led his royal warriors out through the giant gates of his castle. Amid 1,000 fluttering banners and the call of 1,000 trumpets from the high battlements, the king's army marched through streets lined with cheering crowds and out onto the plains of Ascalon. It was said the procession lasted half a day, so many men followed in his train. The entourage had traveled to Hinson by the Sea, or Hinsonby, as it was usually known, and had boarded the sturdy warships waiting them in the Hinson harbor, and sailed forth. The ships were provided by King Selric of the small island country of Drin, whose people were known to produce the world's greatest sailors. Other kings from other lands joined them, swelling their forces beyond anything ever before seen or imagined. They were going to meet the barbaric Urd, a race of creatures one scarcely dared to call human. They were so savage, so brutal, their very existence imperiled all. The Erd, united under the king, Gore, had risen in defiance of all civilized order, vowing to extinguish, make slaves of other nations. They would rule the world. 12 kings of the civilized nations had met and declared war upon Gore, sailing to meet and join him in battle, with him in his own lands, before the evil lord had time to mass his army against them in theirs. The fighting had begun in early spring, and by summer it looked as though the campaign would conclude before winter set in, so successful were the United Kings' first encounters. Wily Gore, seeing his warriors melt before the terrible onslaught, retreated to his massive walled fortress, Golgor. There the stubborn renegade dug in, establishing himself with strength and fervor no one could have foretold. From Golgor, the raving giant taunted the valiant forces of the kings. His raiding parties, though often beaten back with heavy losses, continually wore down their defenses. Winter found the enemies deadlocked. The war, so easily won in the spring, dragged on and on. Years passed, and the war continued. Thousands of men died in that hideous country, never to see friends, loved ones again. Several of the kings pulled out in the 7th year, returning home with the tattered remnants of their once proud armies. But Escobar, Selric, Brandon, Cawitha, and Troyan fought on. For all Quentin knew, they fought on still. Quentin raised his eyes to the horizon. He could see, it seemed, forever. Land fell away on every side, unobscured, except for the occasional looming shape of a gigantic boulder or jutting escarpment that arose abruptly at intervals throughout the hills. But the slim rider was leaving the hills behind, and the dark line of the forest drew ever nearer, as if by magic. Ascalon, his destination, stood on the far side of the forest. Beyond that, to the west, lay the flatlands and the farming towns, and the cities of the plains, Bellevue being chief among these. To the far north was Woodsend, a substantial village of farmers and craftsmen, firmly planted on the banks of the Wilst River. A long, lazy branch sprung from the Arvin, whose headwaters originated, as did all the waters flowing through this realm, in the high Fiscal Mountains above Narramore. At his back rose the imposing mountains themselves. Beyond them, the regions of Sutherland to the south and Obery to the north. These were the Wilderlands, remote and virtually uncharted areas, inhabited only by wild animals, and even wilder men, the Ger, or Ger, as they were often called. The Ger were the lingering descendants of the most primitive dwellers of the land. They still clung like moss on weathered rock to their obscure ways, changing not at all since anyone could remember. They were said to possess many strange powers, gifts that more disposed them towards the wild creatures with whom they shared their rough lands than rendered them acceptable companions for civilized human beings. The Ger kept to themselves, for the most part, and were alike left alone by one and all. Quentin, like most younger people, had never seen one. They existed for him as characters out of children's stories, told to frighten and induce obedience in youngsters showing reluctance to behave themselves. Quentin stirred from his meditation on these and other things to notice that it was approaching midday. He began looking for a sheltered place to stop, where he might eat a morsel and rest the horse. He appeared to be not the least bit taxed for his exertion. The weak winter sun, which had been struggling to burn through the hazy overcast all morning, suddenly flared high overhead like a hot poker wearing through sackcloth. Instantly the landscape was transformed from its ghostly pall into dazzling brilliance. With the sun, although seemingly small and distant, came heat. At least Quentin imagined that he felt warmed, felt the heat spreading over his back and shoulders and seeping through his thick, fur-lined cap. Ahead, he spotted a small stand of birch trees encircled by a tangle of forlorn shrubbery and several small evergreens. The sight offered a slight shelter from the biting wind that, now the sun was out, whipped more sharply. Quentin found the sun good company as he reined the horse aside and tied him to a nearby branch. Clambering down from his steed, the boy fumbled in the shallow rucksack, filled with provisions that Bjorkus had made for him for the trip. He fished out a small loaf of seed cake and, throwing his cloak behind him, sat down to eat his meal. The sun played upon his face, warming the frozen tips of his nose and ears. Quentin removed his hat and turned his face to the thawing warmth. His mind skipped back once more to the bustle and confusion of his leaving. He rehearsed again, as 100 times before, his instructions. Go to the hermit of Pelgrin Forest. Do not stop, except to eat and to rest the horse. Do not speak to anyone. Do not deliver the letter to anyone but the queen. The last order would be most difficult. Ronsard, in his final act before losing consciousness, had given his dagger to be used to gain audience. The knight's golden dagger would be recognized and would speak for the gravity of the occasion. Quentin was not as distracted by his impending reception at court as he might have been. He was far more curious and frightened. But curiosity held the better of his fears, to be sure, over the mysterious communication that was now sewn inside his plain green jerkin. He absent-mindedly patted the place where it lay next to his ribs. What could it contain? What could be so important? And yet, as intrigued as he was by the enigma he carried, part of his mind was worrying over another problem, like a hound with a gristlebone. An item he did not want to consider in any form at all. His future. He avoided the thought like a pain, yet it gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, never far from remembrance. Quentin delicately pushed the question aside every time it intruded into his thoughts. What are you going to do after you've delivered the letter? The lad had no answers for that question, or for the 100 others of a similar theme that assailed him at every turn. He felt to himself begin to dread the completion of his mission more with every mile. He wished, and it was not a new wish, that he had never stepped forward. He had regretted it as soon as he had done it. But it was as if he had no will of his own. He had felt compelled by something outside himself to respond to the dying knight's plea. Perhaps the god Ariel had thrust him forward. Perhaps he had merely been caught up in the awful urgency of the moment. Besides, the omen had foretold... when did omens ever run true? Eyes closed, face to the sun, Quentin munched his seed cake, pondering his fate. He suddenly felt a cool touch on his face, as if the sun had blinked. High above him he heard the call of a bird. Quentin cracked open one eye and recoiled from the brightness of the light. Squinting fiercely and shading his face with an outstretched arm, Quentin at last determined the source of the call. At the same instant, his heart seized like a clenched fist inside of his chest. There, flying low overhead, was the worst omen imaginable. A raven circled just above him, casting flittering shadows upon him with its wings. 3. The blue, cloud-spattered sky had dissolved into a violet dome, flecked with orange and russet wisps, and the shadows had deepened to indigo on the white snow before Quentin found his rest for the evening. The rough log hut of Derwin, the holy hermit of Pelgrin Forest. The hermit was known among the lowly as one who gave aid to travelers and cared for the peasants and forest folk who had often had the need of his healing arts. He had once been a priest, but had left to follow a different god, so the local hearsay told. Beyond that, nothing much was known about the hermit, except that when his help was required, he was never far away. Some also said he possessed many strange powers, and listed among his talents the ability to call up dragons from their caves, though no one had seen him do it. It seemed strange to Quentin that Bjorkus should know or recommend such a person to help him, even if the aid was only a bed for the night. For Bjorkus had given him a silver coin to give to the hermit, saying, "Greet this brother in the name of the god, and give him this token." He had placed the coin in his hand. That will tell him much. Say that Bjorkus sends his greetings. He paused, and that he seeks a brighter light. The priest had turned hurriedly away, adding mostly to himself, "That will tell him more." So Quentin found himself in the fading twilight of a brilliant winter day. The hut was set off the road by a short distance, but completely hidden from view, surrounded as it was by towering oaks, evergreens, and thick hedges of brambly firs. took Quentin some time to locate the hut, even with the precise directions he had been given. At last he found it, a low, squattish building that appeared to be mostly roof and chimney. 2 small windows looked out on the world, and a curious round-topped door closed the entrance. The homely abode was nested in a hillock at the far end of a natural clearing that gave way to a spacious view of the sky overhead. The ground rose to meet the house on a gentle incline, so that one had to climb slightly to reach the front door. Quentin quietly rode up to the entrance of the hut. Sitting on the horse, he could have leapt from his saddle onto the roof with ease. But he chose instead to slide off the animal's broad back and rap with the flat of his hand on the heavy oaken door. He waited uncertainly. His hand had hardly produced any sound at all, except for the smoke curling slowly from the stone chimney, and you would have suspected the place abandoned. Someone had been there. The clearing was well trampled with the footprints of men and animals in the snow. Quentin slapped the knight's dagger from its place in his belt beneath his cloak. Holding it by the blade, he banged again on the door, this time with a more satisfactory result. He waited. The sky was darkening quickly now. The sun was well down. You could feel the cold strengthening its hold upon the land. No sound came from inside. Plucking up his courage, Quentin tried the crude latch and found that with some force it moved. He placed his weight behind the door and shoved. The rough-hewn door swung upon its hinges and opened readily. Quentin stumbled quickly in with more ceremony than he had planned, bumping over the threshold as he entered. The room was a good deal larger than he would have guessed from the outside, and it was sunken well below ground level. Stone steps led into the room, which was warm and cozy, lit by the flickering fire left burning in the wide, generous fireplace. About the room stood an odd assemblage of handmade furniture, chairs, tables large and small, stools, and a large lumpy bed. Also something that surprised Quentin and strangely delighted him: books. Scrolls were heaped upon the tables and stuffed into the lattice-work shelves, more scrolls than he had ever seen, even in the library of the temple. All this Quentin took in as his eyes adjusted to the relative gloom of the dark room. He also saw the place was empty of its chief inhabitant. Derwin apparently was absent, perhaps on some mercy errand in the forest nearby. Quentin decided to slip in and await the hermit's return, dragging up a stool to the fire burning low on the hearth. Quentin did not know whether he was awakened by the sound or the smell. Voices seemed to drone into his consciousness from far away. No words could be understood, only a monotonous buzz of 2 voices talking quietly, but with some enthusiasm. Close by, the smell of food, warm and heavily laced with garlic, drifted into his awareness. He opened his eyes. He was covered by his own cloak and lying a little way from the hearth. 2 large figures sat near the fire. One knelt at the edge of the fire, stirring a large black pot with a long-handled wooden spoon. The other sat on a stool with his back to him, revealing nothing of his features or stature. Both men were dressed in dark, flowing cloaks. As they talked, their long shadows danced on the far wall of the hut, like the animated puppets in a shadow play. Quentin rolled cautiously up to his feet. The movement at once caught the eye of the man busy over the bubbling pot.
"So it is! Our young friend lives! I told you, Theto."
He winked at the other man, who twisted round to regard the youngster with a quizzical eye.
"I told you my soup would bring him round. Enchanted! Bah!"
Embarrassed to have fallen asleep at his post and now to be the center of such attention, good-natured though it was, Quentin stepped up timidly to the fire and addressed himself to both men simultaneously. "I am Quentin, at your service, sirs."
"And we at yours,"
came the standard reply. He fumbled at his belt for the silver coin.
I bring this to you with greetings from Bjorkus, senior priest of the High Temple."
The greeting sounded very stiff and formal, which suited Quentin, unsure as he was about what kind of reception he should expect. Yet he knew as he placed the silver coin into Derwin's hand that he had nothing to fear from this man. Derwin's face radiated a kindly light. Bright blue eyes winked out of a hide creased and lined like soft leather and browned by the sun. Great bushy brown eyebrows, which seemed to have a life of their own, highlighted the hermit's speech, and were matched, brush for bristle, by a sprawling forest of mustache and beard. Beneath his cloak he wore the simpler robes of a priest, but gray rather than brown.
So it is. Old Weasel sends you with this, does he indeed?
Hermit turned the coin over in his hand thoughtfully.
Well, I don't suppose it can be helped, can it?
Then he turned to Quentin and said,
There's a wider path than many know, though I'm sure you don't have an inkling what I mean.
Quentin stared back blankly.
No, of course you don't. Still, he sent you here.
The hermit mused to himself.
Did he tell you anything else?
The holy man asked. Only this, that he seeks brighter light. At this, both men exploded with laughter. The other hood remained silent, was obviously following the exchange closely.
He said that, did he?
Darwin laughed.
By the gods' beards, there's hope for him yet.
Quentin stood mystified at this outburst. He felt awkward and a little used, relaying jokes of which he knew less than nothing to strangers who laughed at his expense. His frown must have shown them that he did not approve of the levity, for Derwin stopped at once and offered the silver coin back to Quentin.
This coin is a symbol of an expelled priest. See?
He dug into his clothing and brought out a silver coin on a chain around his neck.
I have one too.
Quentin took the 2 coins and examined them. They were the same in every detail except that Derwin's was older and more worn.
They are temple coins, minted for special occasions and given to priests when they die or leave as payment for their service to God. Some payment, eh?
You used to be a priest? Quentin wondered aloud.
Yes, of course. Yokas and I are very good friends. Entered the temple together and became priests together.
Enough of old times, said the stranger patiently.
Derwin, introduce me to your guest in a proper fashion.
Quentin turned and eyed the dark man, ignored for the most part until now. He was above average in height, Quentin guessed, but since the man was on the stool, with his limbs folded across themselves, Quentin could not tell for sure. His clothes were of a dark, indistinct color, and consisted of a long cloak worn loosely over close-fitting tunic and trousers of the same dark material as the rest. He wore a wide belt at his waist, to which was attached a rather large leather pouch. The man's features commanded the better of Quentin's attention. The face was keen in the firelight, bright-eyed and alert. High forehead rose to meet a head of dark, thick hair, swept back and falling almost to his shoulders. The man's sharp nose thrust itself out over a firm mouth that opened upon a set of straight, white teeth. On the whole, the appearance bespoke a man of action and movement, of quick reflexes, perhaps quicker wits.
Quentin, the ex-priest was saying, this man you are staring at is my good friend Theodore. Much welcome and often missed guest at this humble hearth.
The man dipped his head low in acknowledgement of the courtesy. Quentin bowed stiffly from the waist out of respect.
I'm glad to meet you, young sir, said Theodore. An expelled priest, I have found, makes a good friend.
At this, both men laughed again. Though he did not know why, Quentin laughed too. The 3 dined on a thick, tasty soup and black bread, washed down with a heady nut-brown ale that Derwin had brewed to perfection. After the day's exercise, Quentin held his own in appetite with the 2 men, and remarked on several occasions that he had never tasted food so good. After they had eaten, they talked. Wandering conversations roamed the length and breadth of the world. It seemed to Quentin that no subject, from bees and to bodkins and books, was left untouched. Never had Quentin been party to such fellowship. Temple's strict regulations kept contact between priests very formal and extremely refined. And though he mostly just listened, Quentin found this new realization of friends around the board with good food and conversation fairly intoxicating. He reveled in it and soaked it up, wished in his heart that this night would stretch on forever. At last Derwin stood and shook his tired head.
Good friends, we must go to bed. We will talk some more tomorrow.
I must leave tomorrow, said Quentin, having entirely forgotten his mission. He peered apprehensively into the faces of the 2 men, who regarded him carefully.
So soon?
replied Derwin.
I thought you would say a little. I'd like to show you what I've been doing since I left the temple.
And how will you be going? Theodore asked.
My horse!
Quentin shrieked. He had also forgotten about his animal in the friendly interchange around the hermit's table. He dashed the door and heaved it open. Peering outside into the frigid black night, there was nothing to be seen of the horse. With a look of horror, he turned to the man. "I have lost him!" "Can you describe him?" said Thedo. "He was a chestnut, the most beautiful horse I've ever seen. Now I've lost him."
"Follow me," Derwin commanded lightly. "I think we will find he has not wandered far."
Hermit turned and disappeared behind a standing partition lined with scrolls. Quentin ducked behind the partition and discovered that it concealed another room, the entrance of which was draped over with an immense bearskin. The room was dark and quiet, but warm, smelling strongly of hay and horses. Derwin carried a stubby candle and with it lit a pitch torch leaning on its holder in the wall. The sooty flame guttered and smoked furiously, and took hold and threw a steady light into the room. This annexed to the hermit's lodge, it was a small cave. Derwin's house had been built right up against the cave's entrance, which explained the smooth stone floor of the hermit's cottage. In the pale light of the torch, Quentin could see his steed alongside two other slightly smaller animals, nose down in a heap of sweet fennel that had been thrown down for them. Relieved and somewhat embarrassed, Quentin thanked his host for his thoughtfulness. "We guessed you were no tree horseman," remarked Thedo good-naturedly, "and we saw him standing in the yard untethered. The lesser animal would have wandered off for good. The horse is well trained, and I surmise you are not his master." Quentin shook his head sadly. "He belongs to another. Or did."
"Enough. We will sleep now and talk of these things in the morning, which, unless I guess my guess, is soon upon us."
It had been decided, quite without Quentin's opinion, but not altogether against his approval, that Thedo would accompany him on the remainder of his journey. This had been discussed over a cheerful breakfast of hot porridge and milk, with bread dipped in honey. Quentin ate with unusual alacrity, his high spirits charged by a renewed sense of adventure. The two men had shown considerable surprise that Quentin had made it this far through the forest without incident. Thedo had said, "Hereabouts pilgrim shelters outlaws of every description. There are some who might set a high value on your horse." Derwin added,
"And not so much on his rider."
"They wouldn't dare touch me," Quentin announced carelessly, full of himself and his own high spirits. "I carry a letter for the Queen." At this news, the first bare hint of Quentin's clandestine errand, both men nearly jumped from their seats. Quentin's jaw snapped shut in alarm when he realized he had just ruined his secret.
"The Queen?"
said Thedo, recovering himself instantly.
"What business might you have with the Queen, boy?"
Now Quentin became guarded and secretive. That is mine affair, and none of yours," he said, a little angrily, though the anger was for his own carelessness and not his questioner.
"They said it would not be from the king, would it?"
Thedo pursued. "I'll tell you no more about it," Quentin retorted. Here Derwin interposed.
"My boy, while it may not occur to you at once, my friend and I have known for some time that you are about an errand of some importance. Your horse, for example, is the mount of a champion, and not the nag of an acolyte. I'll wager that your expulsion from the temple was not due to the willful breach of your sacred vows, but rather out of necessity to the task you have undertaken." Derwin paused to regard Quentin carefully. Quentin colored somewhat under the hermit's scrutiny and the sudden knowledge that he was so transparent. "I see that I've struck close to the mark. Lad, you can trust us. I mean you no harm. I think you will find no two better men who will hold your secret, as though their own lives were forfeit." Thedo spoke quietly and with deep assurance. Quentin believed the tall stranger, but sat in sullen silence, not knowing whether to speak further or hold. "You possess the strength and bravery enough for two of your size," Derwin continued. "There are offences afoot which bravery and strength alone are no match. I think Bjorkus realized this and sent you to me, hoping I could guess the seriousness of your mission and help you if I could. Perhaps the god himself prompted you to spill your secret in our hearing just now, to save you from harm." "Is it so dangerous, then, for a subject to confer with this queen?" Quentin asked solemnly. Both men nodded in silence. Thedo replied, "Seeing the queen is but a trifle, providing you are able to obtain entrance to the castle alive. For those who keep ignorant of outside affairs, the better to plant their own evil seeds. Without our help, you might never reach the Queen. Prince Jaspin would get you if an outlaw band did not.
Prince Jaspin? Quentin wondered why he had never heard the name.
Prince Jaspin, Derwin explained, is King Escovar's younger brother. He desires the throne of Ascalon. He incites treason and treachery with increasing boldness. Honest men are afraid for their land and lives if they dare to stand against him. Many nobles have lost everything to Jaspin for refusing to join in his intrigues.
Quentin turned all this shocking information over in his mind, but found himself at a loss to know what to do. He at last decided to trust the former priest and give his unusual friend and share with them the rest of his secret. "I'm going to see the Queen," he stated slowly, "to give her a message of importance. 2 days ago, a wounded knight came to the temple, demanding our aid. He had been set upon by outlaws and was dying. I volunteered to take the message, which was written in secret and sealed. It is his horse I ride, and this is his dagger." Quentin drew back his cloak to reveal the knife's gold handle.
"The knight. Do you know his name?"
Ado asked quickly. "It was Ronsard."
"Ronsard? You can be certain?"
"Yes, I saw everything. He said his name and asked for someone to take the message to the Queen. I volunteered."
"Then you are even braver than we thought," said Derwin. "The message. It comes from the king, then," said Theodore. "Ronsard is one of his personal bodyguards, a knight unequaled in strength and valor."
He looked at Quentin sadly. "He is dead, you say?"
"Yes, that is," Quentin hesitated. "I think so. I dared not wait to the end, but he was very near death when I left."
Quentin fell silent, remembering how vividly the events that had brought him hither. He felt afraid, very alone. "I can trust you? You will not deceive me? Promise not to tell."
Durin rose from his seat, came around the table, and placed his hand upon Quentin's shoulder. "My son, you have done the Queen a great service by sharing your secret with us. Quite possibly you've rendered your king an even greater service. Ronsard, I think, would be no less pleased of this outcome if he had thought of it himself." "The hermit speaks the truth," said Theda. "But now we must make plans to deliver your message. The outlaws will be the least of our worries."
Theodore and Quentin left the hermit's cottage about midday, as the light snow of fitful flakes drifted down to lose themselves in the whiteness already deep upon the ground. Derwin remained behind to attend to his usual affairs, saying, "I shall be waiting with hot soup and a cold drink when you return. I would only slow you down otherwise." As they led their horses back along the narrow track to the road, they heard his voice loud in the winter stillness, calling,
"The God go with you, and keep you, and speed your safe return."
"Who is the god Derwin serves?" Quentin asked after they had ridden several minutes in silence, each lost to his own thoughts. Theodore seemed to consider this question and answered at length.
"I do not know that Derwin has ever spoken his name. It may be that he does not have one."
A nameless god. The thought occupied Quentin for a long time. They rode through the forest, a dense old tangle of ancient oaks that wove huge branches overhead in a stark, intertwining canopy of bare limbs. Here and there, a stand of finger-thin pines shot upwards through the spreading branches of the oaks to find the light above. The horses moved easily through the snow, which had not drifted to any depth upon the forest floor. Theodore rode quick ahead on his quick brown palfrey, and Quentin, astride the mighty Baldur, followed not far behind at his right shoulder. Quentin listened to the forest sounds, snow sliding off the branches of trees with soft plop, the creak of a bough shifting in the cold, a lone bird call, sharp and distinct in the distance. Even the quiet was full of sounds when one listened. "Do you think we will meet with any outlaws?" Quentin asked after a while, remembering what had been said earlier.
"We should hope that we meet nothing but the trees and the snow. But there are some outlaws here who are more honest than you or I. men driven to the refuge of the forest by Prince Jaspin and his thieving rascals. This was spoken with a quiet defiance that Quentin could easily apprehend. However, there was something else in the dark man's tone that he could not guess. If we chance upon anyone in these woods, pray he serves no lord but the Dragon King, Theodore continued. I am not without reputation among such men. Perhaps the snow will keep them inside today, Quentin observed, and even as he spoke, the clouds overhead showed signs of scattering. The last few flakes drifted down slowly. Yes, perhaps, although a traveller is a welcome sight these days. Many who once travelled on business have taken to hiring armed escorts or banding together in the hope that numbers alone will daunt the robbers. Most avoid the forest altogether, and those lucky enough to pass unharmed are nonetheless marked well. You, my friend, were very lucky to have escaped notice thus far. Were you not afraid? I did not know that these robbers had become such a serious problem. News does not travel to the mountain top, eh? The gods and their servants care not what takes place in the world of men. He laughed strangely. Mensendor is besieged by trouble. Once honest men turn on one another, innocent blood is shed by day. These are grave times. I had not heard, replied Quentin, as if to defend himself. Although from what, he did not know. I suppose not. Maybe it's better that way. Innocence is a gift. Who knows, you might never have volunteered for such an errand if you'd known what lay ahead. At last, with only an hour of daylight left, the forest began to dwindle, becoming sparser and more open. Then, quite unexpectedly, the two riders were free of it, and there, across a broad valley cut through by a deep, narrow stream, rose the soaring battlements of Ascalon. The king's stronghold sat upon the crown of a hill, glittering in the fading light. Its tall towers commanded a view clear to the horizon, and could in turn be seen for miles in every direction. The crimson evening light behind it, the mighty fortress loomed dark and menacing, itself a fantastic dragon curled upon its stone couch. Quentin shivered in his saddle. Long had he dreamed of this sight, and now he was seeing it. They say this castle is the oldest thing upon the land made by men, said Theodore. Of all the ancient wonders, only Ascalon survives. King Selvacor, when he came to this country, laid the cornerstone himself. It was not finished till 1,000 years later. It housed 50,000 fighting men, and horses for half that number. There's not another fortress made by man that has its equal. It has weathered siege upon siege, and war upon war. Those walls stood when our fathers' fathers were babes, and they will stand when we are dust in our graves. Has it ever been conquered? Never, at least not from without, not by force. But intrigue, the fighting within, has laid many a king low. Even those great walls cannot stop to see. The two descended the gentle slope of the hill and splashed quietly across the stream. Already the last light of the day failed them, but the lights were twinkling in the village that crowded close beneath Ascalon's protective ramparts. As they moved closer, the great dark shape above them became lost in the night, the mountain vanishing behind a shadow. The lights shining rosy from the windows drawing near with every step threw warm light upon the snow. Quentin heard voices from within the house as they passed, and occasionally the yeasty smell of hot bread would meet his nostrils, with a tang of meat basted over an open hearth fire. Suddenly he felt very tired and hungry. Will we go to the Queen directly? No, I think not. Tomorrow will be soon enough. I want to find out how things sit at court these days. It has been some time since I was here. He paused, reining up his horse so that Quentin could draw abreast of him. He spoke in a lower tone. Tonight, you're my nephew. If anyone should be curious, speak only if spoken to. And say nothing about the Queen or King to anyone at all. Watch me at all times. Do you understand? Quentin nodded quickly.
All right then, continued Theo in a more relaxed voice. How about some supper? Gwen glanced up and saw that they had stopped outside an inn of some size, where the sign that bade travelers welcome hung over the door, and it sported the painted likeness of someone or something Quentin could not quite make out. As they dismounted, the door burst open, and a short man in a tunic and pantaloons with a white cloth wrapped around his bulging middle came bustling forward. "Welcome, welcome," the man chirped. "Supper's just being laid. If you hurry, you may find places at the board. Quicker now, never mind, I'll take care of your horses." "Very kind of you, Milcher," said Theodore with a smile. "You're as blind as ever. You don't even know who it is that you're dragging out in and out of the night. Nor do you care." "Who's that? Is that Theodore?" The man came in closer and peered into the traveller's face. "Yes, of course I knew it was you. Recognized your voice. Come in, come in. Too cold out here to be wagging your tongue. In with you both." He took the reins from their hands and led the horses away behind the large rambling structure. "Hurry now, supper's just being laid," he called out as he disappeared round the corner. Theodore and Quentin stepped up to the entrance. As Theodore shoved open the broad door, he placed his hand on Quentin's shoulder. "Remember what I told you." He laid a long finger to his lips. Quentin nodded with a furtive smile. "Yes, Uncle." The room was loud, with voices raised and the clink of pewter ale jars. Smoke from the candles upon the table, from torches on the wall, and from the improperly drafted fire in the huge fireplace filled the low-beamed room. The scene was at once jolly and reckless, boisterous and enthusiastic. Quentin found himself grinning heartily not 10 steps inside the door. Theodore propelled them both toward a long table standing just a few paces from the hearth. Contrary to what Milcher had insinuated, there were plenty of places at the table. Most of the guests were taking liquid nourishment this evening. But the innkeeper had been right. They were just in time. No sooner had they settled themselves upon the rough bench at the far end of the table than platters of steaming food appeared. They being plates of meat and vegetables, and several kinds of bread and cheese were served by a stout woman, with a ready smile and red cheeks, and a thin, gawky boy who lurched clumsily as he smacked the pewter plates down. "Careful, Arthur," called the woman amiably. "You had your supper, now let these fine gentlemen eat theirs in peace." The comical pair returned to the kitchen then, only to reappear at frequent intervals to pester the diners with more food and drink. "Eat," the woman scolded. Eat, please, you're not eating." As the diners finished, they left the board to others who sat down at their places. Theodore and Quentin, at Theodore's command, ate leisurely and with slow deliberation. Theodore's watchful gaze swept over the roisterous scene, alert to any hint of discovery. But even his quick eyes failed to see a small, dark man appear at the door like a shadow, slink into a darkened corner. The spy left moments later, undetected. After a while, Milcher, the busy little proprietor of the inn, stepped around to see how his newest guests would be accommodated. "You will be staying the night with us, I hope?" he asked. "Yes, you will have us at your mercy," replied Theodore with a grin. "Good, I thought so. I have already stabled your horses for the night." "But who's this?" he exclaimed, noticing Quentin's benevolent stare. "I don't think you've introduced me to your friend, Theodore." He beamed down at the boy with a face red from running on his endless errands. "Haven't I?" said Theodore casually. "Haven't I?" said Theodore casually. "Well, I thought you knew. This is my nephew, Quentin." "Oh, of course, I knew it all along, didn't I? Oh my, so big already. Hasn't he grown?" That the little man was off again, buzzing like a bee in some other corner of the noisy, crowded room. "Let us hope no one else takes interest in my family life tonight. Milcher can talk more than any 20 women. I'd rather our little visit was known by as few as possible." "I think someone might be looking for us." The thought had just occurred to Quentin. "It is likely. Whoever killed Ronsard, or had him killed, must know by now that the secret he carried did not die with him. Though we cannot be sure. Perhaps maybe they did not know about the message." "You mean he was not attacked by outlaws?" "No, lad. Or at least not altogether.
Outlaws may have been hired for the deed, but they would scarcely have gone up against a king's knight without better reason than his purse. And an outlaw values his life more than that, I think. No, it's probably someone who knew what he carried, or suspected his mission. Prince Jaspin, maybe? The intrigues of court were new to Quentin, but he found himself irresistibly drawn to them. His quick mind leaped ahead to all sorts of possible collusions. A fox in a yard full of plump chickens. Maybe it would not be the first time he's used others for deeds he would rather not do himself. I think there are some other. I cannot say why. Feel it here, pointed to a snake. But now I feel well stuffed, we might as well be off to bed. We must still find a way to guarantee our private audience with the Queen tomorrow. Melissa returned and bustled them off to their room, where his wife, jolly red-faced woman, had laid aside the bedclothes of a high, sturdy bed. The smaller, more portable pallet had been placed near the fireplace, which warmed the apartment. The chamber was square and plain, but private and cozy enough. There was no window, a feature Theodore had requested. "Sleep well tonight, good guests. Sleep well," said the innkeeper, closing the door to their chamber and tiptoeing quietly away. "I would just loosen my belt if I were you," warned Theodore as Quentin, seated on the edge of the pallet, began pulling off his tunic. "Tonight, we must be ready for anything." Not far distant, high up on the hill in Gascoigne Castle, a candle burned low in a spacious and richly appointed bedchamber. The floors were of white marble, and the walls hung with exquisite tapestries depicting the occupant's favorite pastime, the hunt. A magnificently carved table spread with a vast cloth of dark blue, embroidered with thread spun from silver, supported a surface littered with maps and scrolls of parchment. At one end of the domed room, for it was the uppermost chamber of the east tower, a crackling fire burned brightly in an ornamented fireplace, overhung by a heavy oaken mantel carved with the crest and blazon of a previous resident. A melancholy figure sat hunched in a great chair with high back and wings on each side to keep off the draught that seeped through the old castle walls. The chair, more so a throne, was drawn near the fire, but its tent seemed to draw neither warmth nor comfort from the dancing flames. Instead, he stared dejectedly into the blaze with a tall horn cup of wine, untasted, in his hand. Prince Jaspin scarcely stirred when the sound of a sharp rap reached his ears from the outer door of his private chambers. A breathless chamberlain presently returned with the news that a certain knight wished audience with him. Upon learning the man's name, Prince Jaspin exploded. "Send me here directly, you old fool! I've been waiting days to hear this news, and you'd keep him cooling in the corridor like a side of beef. I should have you flayed." The chamberlain, well accustomed to his master's fits, did not hear what was said in his absence, leaving at once to bring this most desired visitor before the angry prince. "Tell me, Sir Bran, what news? Have you found him yet?" Jaspin leaped from his chair as the knight entered. "Yes, he is here, in the village," the knight said, bending low from the waist in a quick bow. "In the village? Where? I shall seize him at once." "I would caution you against such a move, my grace. Your grace, it would attract too much attention. We do not know how many there are. He might have brought some of his men with him. Anyway, it's better done in the daylight." "Yes, I suppose you're right." The prince settled back into the silk cushions of his chair, much pleased by the news. "We must not blunder the opportunity as we did the last." He paused and asked casually, "Are you certain Ronsard is dead?" "Quite certain." The knight, dressed in a fur-lined coat, cape, and gloves over a rich tunic of fine brocaded linen, began removing his gloves. The chamberlain brought a chair and took away his cloak. The powerfully built knight poured himself a goblet of wine from a standing flagon, and downed half of it in one swallow. "You do live well, my prince," he said as he sat down opposite Jaspin. "Those who support my cause will not need to neglect their appetite for finery, I can assure you. Have I told you, Bradley, I am thinking of giving you a candle for your efforts? What would you do with it, I wonder?" "Give it to me, and you shall see," retorted the knight. "You are anxious, aren't you?" The prince laughed. "Yes, by and by we shall see. I would give it to you now, only that spoiler Theodore, whatever he calls himself, is still loose and roaming about. We cannot have him coming forward and pressing his claim. How awkward that would be." "I can deal with him," sneered Bran, pouring himself another goblet of wine.
As you dealt with Ronsard,
The prince jibed. You will remember we did not know it was Ronsard until the very encounter. Anyway, with those wounds and the freezing cold, he did not go far. That I know.
But you never found the body, did you?
The prince said firmly. It was snowing, by Zor, the knight snapped angrily. Do you not believe me? The snow covered everything within the hour. His horse wandered off and left him where he fell, and the snow covered him.
Yes, I know the snow. You watched the ambush from some distance.
By the time I got there, I could find but 2 of my own men.
Well, it is over. Now to put an end to our other problem. This outlaw leader. What did they call him?
The Hawk, said the knight sullenly.
Yes. Strange this Hawk is suddenly showing himself. And so close at hand. How do you explain it? Insinuated the prince in a sly voice.
I do not explain it. The knight banged his silver goblet down upon the arm of the chair, wine sloshed up over the rim, running his hands. Happen chance. It's coincidence, nothing more, he said, straining to control his temper. Or perhaps one of the worthless robbers I hired for this. Transaction returned to his den and wagged his tail for his master.
Possibly. There's no animal of dogs, you know.
Jaspin quipped. The prince sipped his wine and sat silently for a time, gazing into the fire now beginning to dwindle.
I suppose we shall have to ask our friend Hawk tomorrow.
The knight smiled quickly and drank deeply of his wine. Yes, we will hear the rascals sing tomorrow. 6. The knight, Sir Bran, after finishing his wine, exchanged a few words with the prince regarding the impending capture of the outlaw Hawk the next morning. The prince dismissed him then and waited until he had gone before calling his chamberlain and discharging him for the night as well. As soon as he heard the door to the outer chamber creak shut, he got up and, taking the candle from the table, made his way to a darkened alcove across the room, hidden from view behind a lower portion of one of the giant tapestries. Slipping behind the tapestry, Jaspin entered the alcove, and, fishing among the folds of his clothing, brought out a key, with which he unlocked a private door set back and cunningly secreted at the farther side. The prince stepped silently into his secret chamber, placed the candle upon a small table, waiting there, and settled himself into a chair before the table. Upon the table sat a small box, resting on an elegant cloth of velvet. The box, richly enameled in a fiery red and inlaid with gold tracery and pearls, gleamed, its fine artistry shimmering in the flickering light of a single flame. Prince Jaspin wasted no time, but placed his hands upon each side of the box and lifted it away. On the table before him remained a curious object resting on the cloth, a pyramid of gold, incised with strange hieroglyphs. The entire surface of the pyramid had been inscribed with elaborate and fantastic runes that were, he considered, the source of its unusual power. Prince Jaspin gazed upon his prize with an odd glint in his eye, as if lit by some unnatural source from deep within. The pyramid had always had this effect on him. He felt bold, invincible, and clever beyond human cleverness. The golden pyramid was the gift of Nimrud, known as the Necromancer, cunning old sorcerer who Jaspin employed as a partner in skullduggery. Many a night did Jaspin draw upon the secret of a strange object and the knowledge of its inventor. But of late, Jaspin received less and less assurance from his accomplice and felt seeds of deep distrust beginning to sprout. Placing his hands on 2 sides of the pyramid, Jaspin closed his eyes and muttered a soft incantation. Slowly the pyramid, pale in the dancing light, began to glow with a ghostly luminescence. The glow became brighter, casting Jaspin's features into high relief and throwing shadows of his hunkered form upon the wall. As the unearthly illumination reached its apex, the sides of the pyramid began to grow indistinct and hazy, but they remained solid under the prince's touch. The pyramid, now lit with an almost piercing light from within, became translucent. Jaspin could see his hands dimly through the sides. In a moment, the strange device had become completely transparent, almost invisible, as Jaspin looked long into its crystal depths. Pale green mist shrouded the interior from view. But as Jaspin watched, the mist began to thin into stringy, straggling wisps. Now the form of a man could be distinguished, walking, as if from a great distance toward Jaspin. Even as the man walked, he drew closer with alarming speed, so that instantly Jaspin was face to face, as it were, with his old sorcerer. It was not a face to be admired. Twisted, cruel. 2 piercing eyes burned out from under a heavy, menacing brow. Despite the wizard's obvious age, wild dark hair shot through with streaks of white formed a formidable mane around the man's large head. The face was creased with interwoven wrinkles, each crevice representing an evil its owner had contemplated.
Ah, Prince Jaspin, the necromancer hissed rather than spoke. I was expecting your summons. I trust everything is as I said it would be.
Yes, your information is always good, Nimrod, the prince replied, his eyes gleaming. The night one saw it appeared just as you predicted and was intercepted before its work could be completed. Unfortunately, we may never know what the errand was. It was killed in the ambush.
A pity. He could have told us so much, no doubt. But we have other ways.
And another of your fruits, the seeds is about to bear fruit, wizard. The outlaw hawk has surfaced again, as you suggested he would. This time, we are ready for him. By midday tomorrow, that irksome band of renegades will be without a leader.
Do not make the mistake of underestimating him once again,
the conjurer warned.
He has outfoxed you before, as you well know.
The necromancer grimaced, and his wrinkles deepened ominously.
Do not think I'll just let him slip away again. My headsman's blade is thirsty, and an outlaw's blood is just the refreshment I shall recommend. His head shall adorn a pike in the village square. Those bandits will see how lightly I consider their threats. I shall have no opposition when the Council of Regents meet, and I shall be named king. Petitions are already signed.
The prince rubbed his hands in greedy anticipation of the event.
All is ready. What about the queen? The wizard asked slyly. Will she agree to step down so easily? Is her power already so diminished? The queen will agree to things as I see them. She is strong, but she is a woman. Besides, if I offer the choice between Escobar's life or Escobar's crown, I'd rather believe she would choose his life. She may lose both, however, as will Escobar. Ha! Ha! Cackled Nimrod. That is your concern, not mine. Leave me out of it. You get the king, and I his crown. That was our agreement. I do not want any difficulties. I cannot afford to rouse a suspicion of the people. I need their support for a while. I am your servant, Prince Jaspin, the wizard replied. Is there anything else you require? No, I think not. I was ready now, the prince replied. He added, Is my brother comfortable? Oh, yes, Escobar is, after all, the king. The necromancer laughed suddenly, and Jaspin felt an unaccountable anger spring up inside his breast. But not for long, he cried. Soon there will be a new monarch on the throne. That I promise. Sorcerer appeared to bow low, and suddenly the pyramid went dim, its sides becoming once more opaque and cold. Jaspin replaced its ornamented cover, and taking up the candle, left the room at once. He did not know why, but the mere mention of his brother's name upset him. That night it troubled his sleep with dreams of doubt and fear. Quentin awoke with a start in a strange room. He glanced over to Theodore's bed and saw that it was empty. He threw off the coverlet and raised himself up off the pallet, took up his cloak, and went off in search of his friend. He discovered Theodore in the stable behind the inn, seeing to the horses. Good morning, lad. I'm glad to see an early riser. I've only just come down myself. He strained from his work of strewing fodder for the horses. Well, that is done. Let us fend for ourselves as well. They ate together at the small table in the kitchen, for Theodore wished to have privacy, although none of the other guests, if there were any, had stirred. I have a plan that will do for us, Theodore said, speaking in low tones. Quentin ate quietly and listened to the plan as Theodore described it. The plan was simple.
They were adventurous furriers just arriving from trading in the Wilderlands and which offered to show the queen the finest of the treasures they had obtained. We have no furs, Quentin objected, and Theodore countered by telling him they would not need any. They were merely to be admitted in order to make a proper appointment to receive any garments a queen might wish to have adorned with their wares. Such appointments were not uncommon with craftsmen of high repute. However, once in the queen's presence, they would discard the ruse and make known the real purpose for the visit. Now, if something goes wrong, Theodore continued, his voice steady and his eyes hard and earnest, you get out any way you can. Do not stop to think or look around. Just run. Go back to Derwin and tell him what has taken place. He will know what to do. Hear what I say, and obey. Understood? Quentin nodded solemnly. He had not considered the possibility that they might indeed fail. But Theodore, noticing the boy's somber mood, smiled and said, Cheer up, lad. It's not the first time I've been hunted by Jaspin's men. I can take care of myself. Besides, my plans seldom fail. Quentin was not comforted by the thought. They finished breakfast and left the kitchen entrance, crossing the yard to the horses. Upon reaching the stables, Theodore threw open the wide doors and froze in his tracks. Run! Get away! He shouted to Quentin, at the same time throwing his cloak aside and drawing out a short sword from a hidden scabbard. Quentin stood rooted in terror. Theodore turned on him and shoved him away, saying, Run! You must get free! In the same instant, two riders bolted from inside the stable. Both had swords drawn and small-armed shields, or bucklers, held ready to ward off their captive's blow. Gwen turned and fled, looking over his back over his shoulder as he ran. He saw Theodore thrust beneath the shield of one of the armed men, knock the blow aside just as the other, while pinning the quarry between the two horses, raised his sword to deliver the fatal stroke. Don't kill him, you fool! A voice rang out in the yard behind Quentin. He turned just in time to avoid colliding with another man on a horse. This one was a knight by the look of his finely wrought armor. The knight called out again, He must be taken alive! In the next instant, Quentin felt a hand grab his cloak in a powerful grip, jerking him nearly off his feet. Quentin, without thinking, lashed out of the horse's leg and landed a sharp kick. The spirited animal tossed its head back and raised its forefeet off the ground as it jolted backwards. The knight instantly lost his hold on Quentin, and the boy dashed beneath the rearing horse's belly and away. He gained the corner of the inn just in time to see one of the riders swing the pommel of his sword down upon Theodore's head. He heard a dull crack, and Theodore slumped to the ground. Quentin ran blindly down narrow streets, some little more than footpaths between shuttered dwellings. He cast a hasty glance over his shoulder as he ran, expecting the man on horseback to come charging into view at every turn. His strong legs dodged and turned and flew as his fear carried him away from the scene. Presently, he became winded and ducked into a close passage between two buildings, on what might have been the main street of the city of Ascalon. He stood out of view of the street and waited to catch his breath and think. Go back to Derwin, he heard Theodore's voice saying. He will know what to do. But he had no horse, and Derwin was a day's ride away. He could not make it afoot, alone, without provisions, those he would need to secure. He had no idea how or where that might be accomplished. Not wanting to remain too long in one place, he began walking along the streets. He had not the slightest idea of where he was going, unaware that he was approaching the castle until he happened to look up and see its high walls, soaring above him. He seemed to be drawn to it, for although he twice changed his direction purposefully to avoid coming too near it lest he be spotted and straightway taken captive, each time he looked again, he was closer than the last. In the meantime, the shops in the merchant districts through which he was walking had begun to open to their daily trade. The roofs hung heavy with snow and icicles dangled from the eaves. Merchants threw wide their shutters onto a bright, cloudless morning and signaled the beginning of another busy day. Soon the cobbled streets echoed with the tramp of busy feet and the strident voices of shopkeepers, patrons, and street vendors exchanging greetings, hawking their wares and haggling over the prices. A number of farmers had braved the cold to set up stalls in which to sell their winter commodities, eggs and cheese, and several types of ale and cider. Large braziers filled with charcoal burned before the stalls. Quentin loitered before these, warming himself and trying desperately to come up with a suitable plan for outfitting his journey. In the end, he decided to risk going back to the inn to recover his horse, provided it was still there and the kidnappers had not taken it. He turned down a street, by the look of it, the craftsman quarters. Quentin saw several artisans' dwellings, Smith's forge, the chandlers, the furriers. Furrier. Something drew him closer to the place. He stood at the entrance for some time, just looking, wondering why he felt as if he belonged there. An accountable feeling he had never seen the place before in his life. Quinn paced along the outside of the building and gazed at the brightly painted sign with a picture of a red fox with an exceptionally long, bushy tail. Finally, he turned to move on before someone within, noticing his shameless loitering, urged him away. As he swung away from the door, a small, two-wheeled covered carriage drawn by a shaggy brown pony drew up. The coach wore a coat of shiny black paint with an insignia on the door. Red, twisting dragon, outlined in gold. The driver, walking ahead, steadied the horse, frisky in the cold morning air, and the hensom's door swung open. A lady sat within, bundled in a thick robe with a hood over her head. The lady seemed about to disembark when she noticed Quentin standing just before her. She smiled and said, "Boy, come closer." She threw back her hood to reveal a fine-featured face and long dark tresses spilling over her shoulders. Quentin thought he'd never seen anyone so beautiful in all his life. What's more, she appeared to be his age, for all that he could tell, or if not, only a year or two older. But her manner and bearing let him know that he was no doubt in the presence of royalty. Quentin stepped woodenly near the carriage and placed his hand upon the door. "Yes, your majesty?" The girl laughed, and Quentin's face colored deeply. I am not the queen," the girl replied. "I'm only her majesty's companion. My lady wishes to be called upon this afternoon by your master." The girl nodded to the furrier's shop. "Take this," she said, handling the surprised Quentin a small folded parchment, enclosed by a ribbon and sealed with wax. "It will usher you directly into my lady's apartment. What time shall I tell you will call?" She suggests after the middays are past. Quentin, remembering enough of his court etiquette, bowed low and replied none too certainly. "Your gracious servant will attend, milady." He mixed the reply, but the spirit was right. The queen's companion laughed again. Her voice was the most joyous bubbling of a happy heart. "I am certain you'll bring your finest furs," she said. Quentin bowed low again, and the driver, looking neither right nor left, took the bridle strap and led the carriage away. Quentin stared at the summons in his hand, wondering at his remarkable fortune. The god Ariel, a deity among whose many attributes was serendipity, had fortuitously arranged for Quentin to have an audience with the queen after all. Quentin considered the serving maid's mistake a miracle of the highest order, stuck the letter into his tunic next to his skin. He moved off quickly, with purpose renewed, forgetting altogether Cleoda's command to seek the help of the holy hermit Derwin. With several hours to employ until he should have his audience, Quentin planned to make his way to the gates of the castle, there to be ready for the appointed hour. He planned to use the time to his benefit, arranging precisely what he should say and do in the queen's presence, how he would confess his subterfuge to deliver his message, and most especially plead for the release of his friend. Although he did not know why Theodore had been taken, he assumed it to have some connection with a secret communication secured to the inside of his jerkin. Quentin forgot his fear of the armed men in the skirmish in the stable yard at the inn earlier in the day, believing his mission to be aided by the gods. He strutted forth as boldly as if wearing the invincible armor of a king's knight. The sight of this young master in his ordinary brown cloak and a dark green tunic, slightly over large trousers and outer stockings with heavy peasant sandals laced high against the winter cold, were swaggering down the center of the street like a whole regiment of king's men, delighted the townspeople. Had Quentin noted the mirth that accompanied his sally to the gates of the castle, he would have slunk away embarrassed. But he did not, so occupied with the deeds and fair fortune that had come his way. His attitude changed sharply, however, upon reaching the gates of the fortress Ascalon. There were mammoth iron and timber constructions, wide enough for a whole company of knights to ride through, a dozen abreast. They stood as challenge to anyone who would make war upon King Escobar to do their worst. The gates had defied fire, axe, and battering ram in siege after siege. From the foot of the long incline of the ramp leading up to the gates, Quentin stood with mouth agape in wonder at the magnificent sight. The castle rose in sweeping lines to tower high into the bright blue winter sky. Red and gold pennons fluttered in the breeze from a score of towers and turrets. Quentin heard the crisp snap of the flags in the icy wind. Of the 5 ancient wonders, only Ascalon remained. The others, the fire fountains of Pelagia, the icy temples of Sanroth, the cave tombs of the Braldurian kings, the singing stones of Cytherea, all had crumbled away, lost in dim ages past. But Ascalon, mighty city of kings with its dragon curled and sleeping under the hill, stood and would endure forever. Ascalon's foundations were carved out of the living stone of the hill upon which it rested, itself a mountain of strength and grace. The massive stone curtains had been raised by the brute effort of 2,000 quarrymen and laborers under the direction of 200 masons. That work progressed for 100 years uninterrupted. Once the outer curtain was raised, the towers were completed, and construction on the gatehouse was begun. The gatehouse, the most vulnerable point of the fortress, was itself a singular engineering feat, established and refined over the next 50 years. The work started on the inner curtain, the walls that would enclose the actual working and living spaces for the royal retinue of soldiers, servants, cooks, keepers, warders, stewards, and the whole host of functionaries necessary to the proper maintenance of the empire. The inner curtain, like the outer curtain, was formed of a double wall, hollow. The interior was filled with earth and loose rubble to withstand the ruinous blows of the battering ram. Once the inner curtain and its towers were enclosed, work began on the apartments and barracks within. In time, the configuration of these inner chambers was to change endlessly, each new occupant directing reconstruction to his own personal tastes and the fancies of the time. The outer structure changed also, if more slowly, as new innovations in offensive strategy demanded defensive updating as well. The castle had grown and changed over 1,000 years to become the thing of dreadful beauty that Quentin saw as he stood gazing skyward, trying to take it all in with a single prolonged gape. It was all he had ever dreamed, and more. After a time, he stepped onto the ramp and began the long, sloping climb to the gates themselves. On his upward journey, he was passed by several ox carts and wagons bearing the supplies to the castle. He noticed them not at all. His eyes were on the looming battlements and soaring towers of the fortress, which surpassed all his most daring imaginings, and in Quentin's mind rivaled the exaggerations men told about it. The walk took much longer than it might have. When at last he attained the edge of the ramp, right up to the end of the drawbridge, that retractable platform spanned a mighty gap from the end of the ramp to the gates at a bone-crushing height above the rocky rubble of the dry moat. Quentin paused. Not wanting to attract the attention of the fierce-looking guards of the gatehouse, he lingered in the shadow of one of the houses built along the ascending ramp in stair-step fashion. The last house furnished a shelter of the wind, so he settled himself beside a friendly wall to wait. People passed, hurrying to and fro on business of their own, but Quentin attended to nothing but the task before him. He tried to imagine what the queen would be like. He'd heard stories of the lovely Alinea, but with his extremely limited experience of woman, he had trouble thinking of anyone who could be more beautiful than the maid he'd met just that morning. Queen Alinea was said to have long auburn hair that shimmered red in the sun, and deep green eyes the color of forest shade on a summer afternoon. Her voice was held to be an instrument of enchantment, and speaking, or singing, for which she had earned wide renown, it fell like laughing water to the ear. This and other details he learned around the priest's table or from the talk of pilgrims he chanced to overhear when they camped on the summer evening outside the temple, awaiting their oracle. Queen Alinea, it was said, formed the perfect complement in grace and beauty to King Escobar's strength and restless vitality. When Quentin had judged midday as past, he stirred himself, glad to be moving again, for he had grown cold and waiting, and marched resolutely towards the gates. Although the main gates were closed, smaller gates, still wide enough to permit 2 wagons to pass one another, were open and attended by firm-jawed guards. Quentin did not know the proper protocol for presenting himself to the queen, but he supposed he'd tell the first person he met what he intended, and let the natural course carry him along. The first person, of course, was a guard who Quentin dutifully approached, but when Quentin opened his mouth to speak, the man waved him on with his lance. He immediately found himself in a low, dark tunnel, the interior of the gatehouse through which the road led into the castle's outer ward. Quentin had expected, due to his lack of military knowledge, that upon passing through the gates he'd be inside the castle, as one would be upon entering the temple. He found the gatehouse road to be disagreeably frightening. The dark and ominous feel was due to a massive portcullis with its sharp teeth of iron, under which he had to pass, albeit quickly. Once through the gatehouse, he stood on the perimeter of the outer ward, gazing on another smaller castle surrounded by its own small city of houses, stables, kitchens, storehouses, and tenant buildings. Some of these were stone, others were made of timber and wattle, as in the town below. The inner castle had its own gatehouse. Quentin made his way there at once. Here, security was more stringent, and the guard at the gate demanded to know his business. Quentin produced the folded parchment. The soldier glanced at the seal and waved him on. Upon emerging from a gatehouse passageway, Quentin hesitantly entered a courtyard of some size. The whole of this inner ward was given over to elegant gardens that contained every known flowering plant and tree in the kingdom and beyond. In springtime, the inner ward would burst in blooms of riotous color, and that was all covered over with a still, white shroud of snow. As Quentin watched, a man dressed in a long, brocaded coat lined with sable, a lord or prince by the look of his rich clothing, emerged from a stone archway to hurry across the garden to another part of the castle. Quentin waited until the nobleman had passed, and then followed him. The man scurried across the snowy expanse and darted into the castle, with Quentin right behind. Once inside, Quentin lost the man when he disappeared into one of the many doors opening off the main corridor. He was standing still, wondered what to do next, when a gruff voice bellowed behind.
Stop! If you have business here, speak up. Well, out with it.
Quentin spun on his heel to see a square-built man bearing toward him menacingly. I have come to see the Queen. He uttered the first words that sprang into his mind.
Oh, have you now?
The man frowned furiously.
Clear out. You should know better than to be looking around my keep. Clear out, I say.
Quentin jumped back and thrust the sealed packet before him as to ward off an impending blow. Please, sir, I have a letter.
What's the trouble here, warder?
The voice came from an open door, and Quentin looked up to see the nobleman who followed into the castle.
This one says he's to see the Queen. I think he's about mischief, I do.
The man stepped up to Quentin. Let me see your papers. Quentin swallowed hard and offered the sealed parchment to the man. He snatched up the letter and broke the seal. Looked at the seal, broke it, and read the message with a cursory glance. Where's your master? The man demanded, eyeing Quentin closely. He could not come, so he sent me ahead to beg the Queen's pardon.
Humph.
Tell your master that he had better value her Majesty's request more highly in the future, or he will lose her favor, and the benefit of her trade. He handed the letter back to Quentin. Very well, follow me. The man was not a lord, as Quentin had supposed, but the Queen's chamberlain. And he had led Quentin through a maze of corridors and anterooms to a high-arched passageway on an upper level of the castle. Sit down, the chamberlain commanded at last. Quentin took a seat upon a low bench, across a corridor from a great carved wooden door. A window of thick, frost-covered glass looked out upon the inner ward, and Quentin gazed out blankly, trying to remember what he was going to say to the Queen. He had forgotten it all. The chamberlain entered and exited the apartment several times, as did others, mostly servants and other women. Once or twice, Quentin thought he must be seeing the Queen herself emerge from the chambers. These visions of beauty Quentin discovered were the Queen's personal attendants. However, all were arrayed and conducted themselves very much like queens to Quentin's unpracticed eye. After a time, the chamberlain emerged once more and came directly to Quentin. Her Majesty wishes to see you now, he said, and added a further word of instruction for Quentin's benefit. When entering the royal apartment, it is proper to kneel until Her Majesty has asked you to rise. Quentin nodded and followed the man through the door to our outer apartment. This was a large open room hung with tapestries and richly furnished. A few women sat at looms, weaving and talking as they worked. A minstrel played in one corner to the accompaniment of several ladies singing. The room seemed filled with charming activity. Quentin wondered which of the lovely women he saw was Queen Elenea. But the chamberlain marched him through this room to another, the Queen's private chamber. Chamberlain knocked once upon the wonderfully carved door and opened it without waiting for a reply. He bowed low and ushered Quentin in. Quentin, not daring to raise his eyes, fell to his knees on the floor. "Your Majesty, the furrier," Chamberlain announced, then left at once. The next voice Quentin heard was the Queen's. "So young our furrier is, and so formal," Queen Elena said. Her voice, just as the poets intimated, was like laughing water, Quentin thought. "Rise, young furrier," she commanded, pleasantly. Quentin raised his head uncertainly, half afraid to cast his eyes upon his queen. But then he saw her, and could look at nothing else. Queen Elena stood before a window. The afternoon winter sky formed a brilliant azure-black drop that highlighted the auburn beauty of her hair. Her comely form was wrapped in a simple hooded gown of deep turquoise that fell in gentle gathers to the floor. She wore a belt of braided gold and pearls that accented her slim waist. Around her graceful throat, a necklace, delicate and dainty, same design. Her radiant hair was swept back, revealing a high and noble forehead adorned with a simple golden circlet. The red-brown tresses curled in dark cascades along her slender neck, framing a face at once so open and frank it disarmed the observer. Her eyes glimmered with good humor that played at the corners of her lovely mouth, threatening to always dissolve her exquisite features into laughter. All this Quentin took in as one bereft of his manners, gaping shamelessly, momentarily stricken speechless by this dazzling vision. "Our young visitor appears to be enchanted by your beauty, Brienne," the Queen remarked, and Quentin saw the girl who he had met that morning sitting next to the Queen with an embroidery in her lap. The Queen had been instructing her in some finer technique of needlepoint. "Rise, I say," the Queen repeated, stepping down from the dais and coming close to Quentin, who jumped quickly to his feet and bowed as she approached. Have you brought something to show me, young sir?" The Queen asked amiably. "Would you have me describe my fancies for you that I may be surprised by your master's art?" Quentin suddenly remembered with a start that he was not the furrier, or even the furrier's apprentice. He did not even know the furrier's name. His trembling hand sought the letter that Ronsard had traded his very life to bring. The Queen detected his tremulous hesitation and asked, "Something wrong? Why do you tarry so?" "Your Majesty, I am not the furrier's assistant," Quentin managed to stammer, and to her look of mild inquiry he added, "But I have brought you something more valuable than you know. It is—" He broke off, glancing at the Queen's companion. "I think you may wish to receive it alone." The Queen smiled at this conspiracy, but nevertheless nodded to Bria, who removed herself with a sharp, disapproving look to Quentin. "Now then," the Queen replied, her hands clasped in front of her, "what is it that begs my private attention?" "A letter, Your Majesty," Quentin said, and opened his cloak. He took the gold-handled dagger from his belt and sliced the thread that bound the patch concealing the letter to his jerkin. "That dagger! Let me see it," the Queen said with sudden interest. She took it from Quentin's hand, turned it over, examining the golden handle carefully. "I have seen this knife on occasion," she declared at length. "I cannot say where." Quentin had finished freeing the parchment scrap from its pouch and produced it without hesitation, saying, "He who owns that knife sends this in his stead." He watched as she took the knife and broke the seal of the letter. She unfolded the crackly parchment and read. Quentin, not knowing what the epistle contained, did not know what to expect. He watched her face for a clue to the letter's contents, remembering that one man had prized its contents with his life. To Quentin it seemed that the effect of the message upon its reader was absorbed only slowly, and it must have been instantaneous. The Queen's face drained of color. She let fall the dagger, which clattered to the floor. Her eyes seemed to grow cold and filled with terror as she thrust the letter away from her. "My king," she murmured. Quentin stood, a grand statue, not daring to move lest he intrude in some way upon the queen's distress. The beautiful monarch's arms fell limp to her sides, as if the strength had gone out of them. Her chin came to rest upon her bosom. Quentin quaked inside to see this gentle woman thrown so cruelly into such distraction. In that instant he vowed that whatever had caused the Queen's calamity, he, Quentin, would set it right. For it was too late for that. He would avenge her grief. He stepped close to her, his own heart rending for her. Instinctively, she reached out for his arm and clutched it. Her eyes were scanning the letter once again. She was silent for some moments. Quentin thought to run to the adjoining anteroom and summon aid, but he dared not leave her. So he stood, offering his arm, as at that moment he would have offered his life. Presently she spoke again, though her voice much changed from what Quentin had recognized only shortly before. "Do you know what this letter contains?" she asked. Quentin said nothing. "Then tell me how you came by it, for I fear it is no jest. I know the signature too well, and the poniard upon the floor is proof enough besides. I am Quentin, an acolyte in the High Temple of Ariel. 3 days ago, a wounded knight came to the temple, asking our aid. He said his errand was most important to the realm, a message from the king. He did not fear death, only that it would come too soon and he would not be able to deliver his message to you. He wrote it then. You have it in your hand. Ronsard, brave Ronsard sent you in his place, a temple acolyte?" The queen looked upon Quentin with wonder that a boy would volunteer for such a mission. Quentin, however, mistook the queen's question. "He did not wish me to come, my lady, but there was none else." "And what of Ronsard?" The queen turned her head away as to avoid the impact of the answer. "Dead?" Quentin again remained silent, lacking the heart to tell her. At this, the queen drew herself up, shoulders straightened, her head lifted. When she turned again to Quentin, she was remarkably composed, revealing her singular inner strength. "He trusted you, and in doing so placed the safety of the king and the future of the kingdom in your hands. I can do no less than trust you too." She moved to a large cushioned chair that had been drawn up near the window. The sky beyond, so recently clean and fair, now appeared cold and far away, dimmed, as if a veil had been drawn over it. Linnea seated herself and motioned for Quentin to follow. When he had perched himself upon the window bench nearby, she said, "Quentin, this letter portends dire events for all who know its secret. Our kingdom is in peril. The king is a prisoner of Nimrud the Necromancer, held by the treachery of his own brother, King Jaspin, who would sit upon the throne. More than that, the letter does not say, but the consequences can readily be guessed. I have been as one blind these years. While I watched abroad the foreign wars, the king's power at home diminished his absence, plundered by Jaspin and his hired thieves. I became aware too late, I myself am prisoner in my own castle. My only hope was that the king's return would strike fear into their craven hearts, and once restored, the king would settle their accounts. That is not likely to happen now. I fear our cause is lost before we have sounded the alarm." The queen turned to gaze out of the window. Her eyes saw nothing of the scene before them. Quentin, feeling at once great pity for the queen and even greater anger at Jaspin, spoke with quiet resolve. "Then we must save the king." The queen turned her head and smiled sadly. "A true man you are. Ronsard was right to trust you, but even if I raise a force, the king would forfeit his life. You see, Jaspin would know in an instant. His spies are everywhere. Not a leaf drops in Pellurin Forest that he does not know about." "I have friends," Quentin offered. "It may be that a few can do what many cannot." How few, Quentin had not stopped to consider. The only people he counted friends in all the world besides Bjorkus and Thedo. Bjorkus were Thedo and the hermit Derwin. "You would go save a king? You and your friends alone?" Queen Linnea seemed about to gainsay Quentin's offer, but then hesitated. She looked at Quentin shrewdly, her head held to one side, as if appraising him for a suit of clothes. "It sounds like madness, but your words are wise beyond your knowing. Who are these friends of yours?" At the question, Quentin blanched, realizing that the list was a short one, without a solitary knight's name on it, but he answered with all the conviction he could muster. "Only Derwin, the holy hermit of Pelgrin, and the one called Thedo." He was embarrassed by his lack of fellowship, but a light came into the queen's deep green eyes. She exclaimed, "Lucky is the man who counts noble Thedo his friend. Do you know where he can be found?" The question posed a problem for Quentin. He did not know where Thedo was. In fact, he scarcely knew anything beyond the fact that Thedo had been captured by men early that morning. A detail he'd forgotten to admit until just that moment. He did not know how to answer. As he opened his mouth to admit his ignorance, the queen continued. It has been some time since anyone has seen Thedo. He was one of the king's best knights and a nobleman, too. The death of his father occasioned his return from the wars, but on his homecoming he was falsely branded a traitor by Jaspin and his brigands. His castle and lands were confiscated. He escaped their trap and has lived the life of an outlaw ever since. Lawhead stood and turned away from the window, gazing down upon Quentin with a sudden warmth. I also would I trust with my life. I know not of this holy hermit Derwin, but if he is a friend of yours, and Thedo, he will not be less my friend. But why do you look so? Is something amiss? The queen asked suddenly, noticing Quentin's fallen countenance. My lady, the Quentin groaned, forcing the words out. Thedo was taken this morning by men who laid an ambush for him. I escaped to come here, but I do not know what has become of Thedo, or where they might have taken him. The queen's answer to this seemingly doom-filled pronouncement astonished Quentin, and enormously cheered him. That is a mystery easily solved, she had said, a tone of rancor coloring her reply. There is only one person who so oppresses the king's innocent subjects in broad daylight, deeds for which even the most impudent rogues seek the cover of blackest night. Prince Jaspin has kidnapped our friend. There's no mistake there, she thought for a moment. Such arrogance would not shrink from bringing the prize within these very walls. The queen swiftly crossed the room and threw open the door to her chamber, and called for the chamberlain, who appeared in a trice. They talked in whispers in the doorway across the room, and then the chamberlain hurried off again. We will soon know the fate of friend Thedo. I have sent Oswald to inquire discreetly of the dungeon keeper whether a new prisoner was remanded to his keeping this morning. We shall see if I guess aright. They waited for the chamberlain's return, Quentin fidgeting with nervous frustration. He wanted to run to the dungeon wherever it might have been and look for himself, then and there to grant his friend liberty. The queen, for her part, bore the waiting with regal calm. Whatever emotions she felt were more of a determined kind, Quentin thought. They seemed to simmer beneath her placid exterior. At last the chamberlain, Oswald, returned. He bowed as low as he could, as he quickly approached the queen, saying, An outlaw was imprisoned this morning, your majesty. The keeper knows nothing else, only that he was instructed by the knight in charge to allow no one to see him, and that no record was to be made of the prisoner's presence. The knight's identity was known to the dungeon keeper. It was Sir Bran, Oswald replied. The queen thanked the chamberlain and dismissed him. She turned once more to Quentin and said, I think we have solved our riddle. But now another arises which will not be answered so easily. How are we to set the captive free? The afternoon sun had set too swiftly, it seemed to Quentin. The queen's apartment was growing dim. Any minute servants would begin lighting the many candles that stood round the queen's private chamber. The day had been a rush of activity, especially the last few hours. Now, however, all was in readiness, and they waited. You appear anxious, young sir. The queen crossed the room to where Quentin was maintaining his vigil upon the window bench. She had been seeing to the last-minute details and had just returned. Do not be troubled, Quentin. He smiled weakly and turned his eyes slowly away from the window, from where he had spent most of the late afternoon watching servants scurry across the courtyard in the snow on furtive business for the queen. I am not afraid, Quentin lied. Only a little. He looked at the beautiful Ellen in the dying light. She had vastly changed since he had last seen her. For only a short while before she had been arrayed in regal finery, the fairest of the fair. Now she stood before him in plainer trappings, a dark green tunic, not unlike his own, with a purple cloak, very heavy but finely made. She wore trousers with a man's wide leather belt at her waist. Tall riding boots complemented her wardrobe. So, you approve of the queen's attire? She laughed, trying to put Quentin at ease. We have the same tailor, you and I. Quentin forced a laugh and stood. When will we be going? The sun is well down. Will it be long? No, not long, the queen reassured. Oswald will summon us when all is made ready. We need not fret. Our preparations are in good care. Quentin was now more uneasy than he had been previously. He had had a taste of the danger of his mission, and witnessed its effects in Theto's case. And that danger had been heightened and multiplied by all that had taken place in the last several hours. On Sard's message, they hastily conspired to plot to free Theto. Feverish preparations for their journey, and now, the waiting. In the waiting, Quentin found time to think about all that had gone before, to doubt his newly discovered bravery, to question again his omens, and wish 1,000 times that he never left the temple, and to curse the blind impetuosity that had propelled him into the midst of this dark adventure. Quentin turned glumly once more to stare out the window. The courtyard below lay deep in violet shadow. A single star blazed bright as beacon fire above one of the southern turrets. Good token, thought Quentin, and was himself brightened somewhat. A quick knock sounded upon the Queen's chamber door, and Oswald entered at once. Quentin had some trouble recognizing him, for he was dressed not as the Queen's chamberlain, but as someone of much higher rank, although Quentin could not say who. He looked like a nobleman. "You look a fine prince, Oswald," said the Queen. "Are you ready to play the part?" Oswald bowed again, turning his back to them. And he shouted thickly, "You might go! Leave!" He turned again and asked blandly, "Would you say that is sufficient for our purpose?" There was just a hint of sarcasm to his voice, and Quentin realized with a start that Oswald was playing the part of the mysterious Jaspin. "I think you will do nicely. I only hope I do not lose my chamberlain. He might like it as a prince, though not as a rogue such as Jaspin, surely." With that, Oswald withdrew into the anteroom. Quentin heard the hollow echo of his summons to the warder. The Queen turned to Quentin and said, "It's time to go. Follow the warder, and he will lead you to the postern gate. Horses are waiting there with our provisions. We'll come along as soon as may be. Go quickly now." Quentin followed the warder, a short, thick bull of a man with black eyes and curly black hair. He looked every inch the soldier he had once been. Quentin bobbed along the man's wake as they made their way along the back ways and little-used passages of the castle. They walked quickly, stopping to look neither right nor left, although Quentin's eyes caught flashing glimpses of rooms opulent and luxurious beyond his simple imaginings. He ached to just be able to just stand and gaze upon them from the corridors. They passed various apartments, the armory, anterooms, and chambers. At one point, they passed a great open entryway with two huge carved oaken doors thrown wide in welcome. Inside, a double colonnade supported an immense vaulted ceiling of concentric arches, with a vast open room that seemed to contain the treasures of a whole kingdom. Quentin had never seen anything like it. The room seemed large enough to have swallowed the temple of Ariel whole. Tren, the warder, saw Quentin's eyes go around as they passed the room, and he explained, "That is the great hall of the Dragon King. There is none like it in all the world." Quentin believed him. No sooner had the warder spoken than he turned like lightning upon Quentin and seized him by the tunic at the back of the neck. Quentin was surprised and shocked. He jerked like a loosely strung puppet and struck out with arms and legs flailing.
"Come along, ruffian, or I'll feed you to the dogs," the warder roared. "Do you require assistance, Tren?"
Quentin heard a voice behind him. He spun around and saw two men, richly dressed and proceeding into the great hall. One looked to be a knight by his armor, but he was no knight like Quentin had ever seen. His armor was silver and burnished to a glittering brightness. His cloak was crimson, lined with sable, as were his gloves and boots. The man standing next to the knight wore a richly brocaded cloak of silk with gold drawn into fine thread and woven into the fabric. His tunic was royal purple, and he wore a large golden collar from which hung his insignia, a vulture with two heads, one facing right and the other left. Quentin guessed it was the knight who had spoken, although he had no way of knowing. "I can manage, my lord," said Tren, dipping his head curtly. "Caught this one in the larder, stuffing his pockets." "Well, give him a taste of your strap," said the nobleman impatiently. Both men turned away, and Tren yanked Quentin behind one of the great doors, clamping a hand over the boy's mouth.
"Quiet, young master,"
he whispered hoarsely.
"We dare not be seen lurking hereabouts."
He removed his hand with an additional caution not to cry out.
"Who are they?"
Quentin whispered. Trent rolls his eyes upward.
Or fear help us, it was Prince Jasper and one of his nobles, Sir Grenett. More foul gentleman I never want to meet.
Let us get away, said Quentin, not seeing no good reason to linger in the vicinity any longer.
We cannot. Any moment, Oswald will walk into a trap unaware. We must do something to prevent it.
The plan had been simple enough, but not without its element of risk. Chamberlain, Oswald, was to impersonate Prince Jaspin after secretly obtaining some of the prince's clothing. A forged message was delivered to the dungeon keeper to place the new prisoner under guard and bring him to the Great Hall, which is the only place the conspirators could think of where Jaspin himself would not likely show up. But their worst fears had, as on such occasions frequently happens, materialized in force. Prince Jaspin and one of his noble knaves had chosen this time for a private parley in the Great Hall, where Oswald in disguise would momentarily appear. Only the doughty Tren and Quentin knew the serious mischance.
I fear the gods will go against us, young master. Yonder comes Oswald. Too soon the prisoner will follow.
Footsteps could be heard far down the corridor. Oswald was hurrying to his place.
There's but one thing for it, said Trent. Diversion.
He peered around the huge door and pointed diagonally across the hall to the darkened arch of an alcove.
See that door over there, he said. That is the storeroom with tables, benches, and all that fills the halls on feast day. Also a quantity of banners and pennons and other such frippery. Set them afire.
He thrust into Quentin's uncertain hands a small flint and iron, attached with a leather thong, which he carried in a pouch at his side.
I'll be right after you, yelling to catch their attention. Mind, when you hear me call, leave all and come out. You'll not have much time, but maybe enough. I understand. Then go.
Tren pushed Quentin forward with such force that the boy fell sprawling into the entrance of the great hall, dropping the flint and iron, which clinked dully as it skittered across the black marble floor not 5 paces from where Prince Jaspin and Sir Grenett had stopped to confer. Quentin leapt to his feet and dived to snatch up the flint and iron. Tren behind him shouted, "Stop him! Stop that thief!" Prince Jaspin and Sir Grenett turned just in time to see Quentin dash towards them, swoop to retrieve his lost utensil, and dart away. Sir Grenett, without thinking, made a swipe after the fleeing youth. But Prince Jaspin, considering this an ill-timed interruption in his important affairs, stood fuming in his place. Quentin reached the door of the storeroom and smacked the iron latch with his hand. The door was secured from within. No, it gave somewhat, but Sir Grenett was upon him. Putting all his weight upon the effort, Quentin managed to force the latch and barely swung the door open, squeezing it through and closing it again in almost the same motion. Sir Grenett's heavy fist rattled the door as he threw the bolt. The door was almost pitch dark. Only a feeble light found its way in from a narrow loop set high up in the wall. With Tren's excited voice and Sir Grenett's angry challenges, and the both men pounding on the door, Quentin stumbled forward and found in a corner of the room banners on standards. He threw them down and set to striking the flint and iron. The effort appeared futile. There was no edge or kindling that could catch a spark. Furiously, he looked for something else to start a blaze. On the floor, he spied a single piece of parchment, a proclamation of some sort that had been read at a feast now forgotten. He picked it up and ran back to the door, crumpling the parchment as he went. He threw it down just in front of the door and struck the flint and iron to it. The spark caught on the brittle old skin. He blew carefully. The spark leaped to flaming life. Trembling, Quentin shoved the smoldering parchment to the threshold and blew his breath on it, sending the smoke streaming under the door.
Fire!
He heard Tren's voice boom out.
The rascal set the stores on fire!
Prince Jaspin, growing more and more impatient with the impertinence of the supposed young scoundrel, came steaming up to where Sir Grenett and Tren stood beating the door with their hands.
Call the guards, I'll have this door down at once. The room will be in blazes before that, Tren objected. My lord, allow me to remain here while Sir Grenett goes round to the other door of that anteroom.
The room has 2 such entrances, I believe, explained the exasperated prince, quickly losing his temper.
My lord could use the other,
suggested Tren. The prince seemed about to overrule this plan. The smoke was now curling about their feet.
I has real flay his foolish hide myself,
he swore, trotting off to find the other door, a location he knew but imprecisely.
Sir Grenett, he shouted, take your post. Let's end this vexation immediately.
The 2 left to their appointed stations. As soon as they were out of sight, Tren called, his face close to the door.
Young master, they're gone. Let us away.
Being the signal, Quentin emerged, coughing from the room. The parchment was now but ashes on the floor, completely consumed. Trent grabbed his arms, nearly wrenching it from the shoulder and pulling him across the floor and away. At the entrance to the great hall, they met a confused Oswald, fearfully peeping in at the scene he had just witnessed.
"A plan is discovered," he said as they drew up.
"No," replied Trent in a hushed voice,
"but you must not linger here all night. We have bought some time. See to your business and flee."
Oswald appeared far from certain. The noise of voices in the corridor behind, and a quick glance to see the dungeon keeper and his guards with their prisoner moving toward them, made up his mind. Chamberlain crossed to one side of the hall and took up his position, back turned towards the entrance. Trent and Quentin did not remain longer to see the drama to its end, but hurried on toward the appointed place, the postern gate. Quentin felt the sting of the cold night air upon his face as they dashed out of the castle and into the broad expanse of the outer ward. Trent and Quentin flitted like shadows over the snow, and stealing through a low stone archway set in a low wall, entered the small postern gate yard. There in the whitened square of the great yard stood 3 horses, laden with provisions. Standing nearby was a member of Trent's gate watch, who was checking saddle and tack for readiness.
"Everything's in order, sir,"
the guard reported when the two came close.
"Good,"
said Trent.
"Go and see to the plank is let down. The others will be here shortly."
The man turned and hastened off. Trent cast a worried glance back over his shoulder towards the castle and said softly to Quentin,
"We have pushed our luck this far. Of course we'll have to see to the rest."
He paused and added in a hoarse whisper,
"But listen, someone comes."
And I believe that's where we'll stop for today. I will have stopped at chapter 10. I will continue reading in my next video. However, this will be all for in the Hall of the Dragon King for now. However, I do have another book that I would like to introduce to you. Unfortunately, the author does not wish for me to read the whole thing, so I shall present the first 2 chapters of a series called Challenger's Call by Nathan Thompson. The first book, Downfall and Rise. Beep, beep, beep. Blare. The alarm went off, scattering sleep from my brain. I rolled painfully over and swung my shaking hand at it, still missing, despite years of practice. Slapping the bedside table sent new waves of pain down my arm and into my brain. With the alarm going off, it felt like the entire world was screaming in my skull. Every nerve in my body wanted to smother the sound with a pillow and go back to bed. I fought through it anyway, and this time all my practice helped. I pressed the off button, not snooze because those people are crazy, and reached for my next item. Groping around, my dizziness cleared enough for me to finally grip the end of my cane. I grabbed it and gave myself a 10 count to see how bad the pain was going to be this morning. 1, 3, 5, 11, 12. Okay, it was going to be bad. But I couldn't let that stop me. It didn't mean that I would have to it would stay this bad for the whole day, and mornings were always the worst time anyway. And I didn't have time to wait for it to get better, not if I wanted to try treatment before school. With a deep breath and a careful heave, I pulled myself onto my unsteady feet. Pain was beginning in my skull and running through my entire body, argued with me the whole way.
"You're wasting your time. Get back in bed so that you can finally hurt less."
Liar, I told my pain. I wasn't wasting my time, and we both knew it wasn't going to get any better if I laid back down.
"You're still wasting your time. You hurt just as much now as you do every morning. The treatment doesn't work."
Liar, I told my pain again. The doctor's record showed improvement to my condition, improvement I didn't have before the treatment. And I didn't hurt just as much today as I did every day. I hurt worse. I always hurt worse on important days. That made the treatment matter even more. I went back to concentrating on walking down the hallway, using my cane to find ground every time my feet got confused.
"You don't know if you'll get better permanently. Maybe it won't work this time. Maybe you'll still screw up today, just like you always have on big days."
I called my pain a liar again. I used to do great on important days before it was there, and I was going to figure out how to do so again. Using my cane in the wall, I turned the corner into another room.
"You're just trying to be positive. Treatment always puts you in a good mood, and you'd agree to it even if it didn't work.
That might actually be true, I admitted as I reached for the VR gaming harness. But I didn't care. I fastened the helmet onto my head. The ground shook, and the air itself roared. I lowered my helmeted head to keep the whirling dust out of my face. I shifted and bent my arm and knees to deal with the cracking, rattling ground under my nailed boots. Cased in steel, I closed my eyes into the distractions around me to let the dust ping uselessly off my armor and the ground shake impotently under my feet. Because if I lost focus, that monster was going to kill us all. Shelvaros, the Canyon Dragon, Lord of the Navrai Abyss. I didn't need to see him to remember his appearance. 30 yards of taut muscles rippling under mud-brown scales. Talons and teeth like rusty gray swords. Claw full of such talons had slammed into the canyon floor earlier, and the ground had been shaking ever since. My teammates were scrambling over the uneven terrain right now, but it was preventing them from fighting properly. Those with weapons were having a nightmare of a time trying to dodge the dragon's teeth and claws over the uneven ground, while those who could use magic were even more impaired. Stinging wind brought too much sound and pain to concentrate on anything but the simplest spells, and those were not enough to bring down the canyon's dread lord. So it really was up to me. If this didn't work, we were all gonna die. Unlike most of the other adventurers, I could work magic in heavy armor. This meant my helmet got in the way of the stinging dust, and the padding inside dealt with the ringing noise. The hobnail boots I had chosen to wear under my sabatons kept me from shaking too much. So as the rock and air raged about me, I spread my hands to work the one spell that could hopefully change the situation. Let a fair wind be at our back, let firm ground be beneath our feet. As we journey on this long, long road, grant us this small mercy. I brought my hands together to finish the blessing, and golden light spread out from my gauntlets. Loud crack tore through the rest of the noise, and the air grew still. The rumbling below my feet also ceased, and I tore forward into a run, fingers reaching for the massive warhammer on my back. It worked, I shouted. Reposition and attack! Shelvaros still had one monstrous claw pressed in the ground, but as the tremors ceased, it stopped roaring and pitched forward, looking down at its claw in surprise. The dragon whipped its massive head to the right and to the left, uncertain, and flapped its giant's wings twice. But we'd never know if it was planning to escape to the air, because we weren't going to give it that chance. Having recovered their footing, the warriors around Shelvaros renewed their assault. Several leather-clad figures leaped through the air and shredded both wings with their blades, while others in heavier armor interposed themselves between the dragon's still dangerous limbs and their more vulnerable friends. As Shelvaros reared back to deal with the many-weapon swarm, lightning bolts and flaming arrows slammed into the dragon as the mages and archers were finally able to bring their own weapons into play. The trapped dragon rocked and swayed, unbalanced, with both wings shredded and its right foreclaw still stuck in the ground. In another moment of inspiration, I slammed my own hammer down onto Shelvaros' strapped claw, then onto the dragon's elbow, over and over, until I could hear its bones crunch. Shelvaros howled impotently whilst collapsing on 3 legs, stubbornly trying to rise back into a standing position. As its neck fell to the ground, a leather-clad form darted across it, spinning and whipping its short glowing blades all across the dragon's sinuous, less armored throat. The howl turned into a whimper, as arterial spray gushed from the red dagger lines my companion had left in its wake. Shelvaros gave a final shudder, and its remaining appendages gave out and collapsed to the ground in a giant cloud of dust. The survivors gathered around it and let out a throaty cheer. Attention! Shelvaros the Canyon Dragon has been slain by the Great Companions and the following ungilded players. Player, Paladin, Herein. This is a server first. Congratulations to the players who have unlocked this achievement. And, because we were the first people to kill this monster on any of the game's servers, attention, Shelvaros the Canyon Dragon has been slain by the Great Companions and the following ungilded players. Player Paladin Herein. This is a world first. Congratulations to the players who have unlocked this unique achievement. Other updates scrolled across my interface, including the fact that I had finally hit the max level. I had been trying to remain cool up to this point, but the fact that I had reached 70 on a raid boss caused me to crack a smile. Raid bosses, especially ones that had never been killed before, were usually only attempted by at least 20, usually 40 max level players. The fact that I had not done so and still played such a factor in its death was huge news, and I pumped a fist so hard into the air I worried I might somehow break my VR gear. The rogue that had landed the finishing blow came up behind me and slapped me hard on the shoulder. The Australian player nearly blew out my eardrum with his enthusiasm. "Congrats, mate! Congrats!" Skyblade X shouted. "You are now officially one of the top 20 badasses in Heroes Unbound." "Thanks, Sky," I said with a wince. "Great kill move on boss, by the way." "Kill move nothing," Sky replied. I was still shouting. "We beat the thing and it was because of you. You found a way to fix a frickin' earthquake. How the hell did you figure that out?" "Really good guess," I replied. "A steady ground and heavy wind are classified as travel debuffs. So I used the Paladin travel chant to see if it would help here. Worked way better than I thought it would." "No way," one of the other players said. "That spell's like level 15. Never helps in raids." "That's because most raid bosses do things like set the ground on fire or rain lightning on you," I replied. "The idea for that one is to move around or hunker down and weather the effects. This one triggered natural environmental conditions that affected your senses and balance, and the effect lasted indefinitely. You can't dodge or outlast it, but it's the exact sort of thing the travel spell is supposed to help with, so it worked here." "That's still amazing, mate," Skyblade X stated. "This boss has been out for over a month, and none of the other raiding guilds have cleared it yet. You were the first one to figure it out. You're not even in a raiding guild." "Yeah," I remembered uncomfortably. "Not these days. Before the expansion, back when the max level was 60, I had been part of one of the more well-known raiding guilds. We had cleared up to the middle part of the Dread Citadel before my condition had kept me from being a consistent member. Then it was scrambling to see what could help me with my pain, balance, and memory issues. I tried to keep in contact with the guild, but my treatments had become too frequently for me to be involved, and since I was embarrassed at the time, I just told them I was leaving for health reasons that I preferred not to explain. I still didn't prefer to explain them, and Sky knew it, so he gave it an awkward smile and left it at that. "Congrats again, mate," he replied. "Nothing else this hell shows you still got it." "Thanks, man," I replied, grinning again, because I truly was grateful. And thanks, everyone, for coming to the raid with me this morning. This was the only time I could make it. Psh, Sky sputtered. 7 p.m. over here in Australia, silly American. The only inconvenience for us is to just not eat dinner so early." "Well, I appreciate it all the same," I replied. "I'm the only guys that's to play with me these days." "Hey, this is real sweet and all, but can we loot now?" the tank asked. His name was Turtle Pants. He had managed to keep the dragon's attention focused almost entirely on him for the entire fight, despite the horrible beating he had taken during the process. Great player, terrible name. "Yeah, let's go for it," I said as Sky nodded to Turtle. I was ready for a change of conversation anyway. This is a world first, so he's got to have some pretty special treasures, right? Every single monster in this game carried treasure. Raid bosses always had the best treasure. Everyone knew that. You kill things and then you take their stuff. Bad advice for real world living, but that's how you get ahead and have fun in Heroes Unbound. Arganus, the loot master, the player in charge of making sure everyone got a fair shot at the treasure, knelt by the lootable corpse and began inspecting it. "Let's see," he began. "Canyon Dragon's Aegis, a shield with really good defensive stats." "I'll take it." "There you go, Turtle. Congrats on cementing your role as the monster abuse maggot." "Damn straight," Turtle replied. Everyone else just smiled and nodded uncomfortably. These days, when games were designed to actually let you feel a tiny fraction of your character's pain through the neural link in the complex VR harness, people who wanted to hold a monster's aggression were considered to be a little strange. Necessary and appreciated, but not quite understood. Anyway, there's also some ancestral foot wraps, leg gear with boosted intellect and mono regen. "You want Triumph?" "Nah," Triumph said with a glossy good nature. "Give him to Fobson. There'll be a bigger boost for him." There were a few more pieces of loot. Dragonbone knife, Skyblade X claimed, a tribal dream catcher that shaman player was supposed to equip and use somehow, some generic shoulder plates of the whale that no one wanted, it was marked for vendoring, and then Aragon stopped looting for some reason. "Well," he said, "I guess we can try to skin the corpse. Can dragons be skinned?" "Hey, wait," I interrupted. "What about the rest of the loot?" "Sold the corpse as on him, Farron. Sorry, there wasn't anything you could use." "You want the shield, Farron?" Turtle Pants offered, generously but understandably uncomfortably. I had played a key role in bringing the monster down, and everyone wanted me to feel like I had been treated fairly. Technically, paladins can use it. No, I said quickly. "Keep the shield, please, keep the shield. I just asked because the boss is still showing as lootable to my character." "That's weird," Aragonus replied. "Shows up as empty to me. Skyblade, you want to take a look too?" As guild master and raid leader, Skyblade had the game-given privilege to double-check the loot master. "Shows as empty to me too, Farron. Sorry. Is anyone else saying the corpse is lootable?" "Of course, of no's and no sorry," he answered him back. Sorry, I said. Maybe it's a bug? Or maybe my condition is finally affecting me inside the game. I tried not to think about that. Well, the mob's showing as unskinnable right now anyway. Hey, Farron, go ahead and check it, Skyblade offered. You sure? I asked. I didn't want to make him and Rangos look shady. One small piece of gear wasn't really worth making a scene over, I admonished myself. Yeah, why not? Sky replied. It's not like you're taking something from us if no one else can touch or see the loot. Maybe you just got a unique drop. Seriously, go for it, Farron, Triumph said. You figured out how to kill the thing. None of us cares if the game rewards you for it. The rest of the guild echoed Sky in triumph, so I walked up to the monster and activated the looting sequence. Again, something only the loot master and the raid leader should be able to do. You have to tell us what you got and get, though, Turtle shouted. And if it's cake, you have to share, Fatizan yelled. Especially if it's magic cake. Or beer! Yes! That started off a chant faster than I had thought possible. Beer! 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 The entire guild took up the chant. I laughed and just focused on getting through the abnormally long looting process. Someone began drumming. The beer chant faded just enough for me to be heard. Ancient weathered handle. Silence. That's not beer. Someone pointed out. A couple of people chuckled. Looking back, I think most of the Aussies really were half expecting me to deliver on virtual beer. Congrats? Sky half offered, half asked. Maybe, I half answered. No stats on it, it's unequipable. Say it's trash level loot. The guild groaned in sympathy. But also unique, I finished. The groans turned from sympathetic to confused. Doesn't that mean you can't give it away or destroy it? I think so, I replied, trying to move the item to a trade window. And sure enough, getting an error message. Yeah, I'm stuck with it. That doesn't make sense, Triumph replied, and he was right. The game had, for all appearances, rewarded my world first kill of a supposedly unbeatable monster, with an item that I could neither use nor get rid of. Gotta be a quest item somehow, I decided, and most people agreed with me. Not sure how to start the quest with it, though. There's no description to it. Might be a ticket to an NPC, Blade X offered, an NPC being an unplayed character. Yeah, maybe, I replied, though I had no idea which NPC would want it. I need to go get ready for school now. You have fun with that, mate. We'll go into a local bar for some real beer, and log on to the forums and brag to the Koreans that they don't have the #1 raiding guild anymore. Hey, lay off, Turtlepants shouted. My grandmother's Korean. Well, she doesn't have a #1 raiding guild anymore, does she? Sky shot back. Or any Aussie beer, Fatizan taunted. Like hell she doesn't. She can outdrink all you bastards. Smiling, I left my Australian friends to celebrate and began to log off, reflecting off my accomplishments. Because if I can handle a 90-foot-long dragon here, I can surely handle my own body out there. Logging off in 30 seconds. Thank you for playing Heroes Unbound. The world went black and bright again. The throbbing headache that had left me when I crawled into the harness returned, and this time it coupled with the disorientation of leaving the simulated world of the game. I waited a few moments for the part of the dizziness to pass, then I began to remove my VR helmet and harness, wincing as my eyes were re-exposed to normal lights. I heard my mother shouting from across the house. She wanted me to wake up and get ready for school, unaware that I was way ahead of her. I stumbled into the bathroom to shower and freshen up for the day. As I pulled my way around the bathroom counter, I used the bathroom mirror to look over myself. I looked a little different than I did back before my condition developed. My once vibrant red hair had faded slightly, supposedly due to pain and stress. I was still tall and lean, but my muscle tone had taken its toll and they sagged visibly. At least to me, I had no idea what other people saw. As always, my hands and feet trembled slightly. But none of that mattered, I told the man in the mirror. You have always done the impossible, I said to myself. The rest of the day will be no different, including the exams. Today is going to be a good day, I added. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I could still hear my mom shouting, Well, Smalcolm, I've been calling you for 10 minutes. Get out of the game and get ready for school. I heard you, Mom. I'm already out and showered. Ow, I said in my head. That noises made everything hurt worse, and if Mom wasn't so stressed about today, she'd remember that. Better try and hurry to the kitchen before she really starts freaking out, I thought to myself. I headed to the kitchen, keeping a hand to the wall, just in case I needed it to keep from falling. But I made it the whole way. Another huge victory. Today is going to be a good day. I'll link to the author's audibles of these books, and you can also simply purchase the books on your own. It's a wonderful series. Whoever you are, wherever you are, have a wonderful day.